Chapter 3492. Oh my god. This lich's chanting is too terrifying. I feel like my head is about to explode. Shangwan Ying frowned. Her pretty little face was pale, revealing her pain and discomfort. This lich's chanting is indeed different from other liches. This chanting is far from comparable to the other liches I've encountered before. Rinzime also discovered that this lich was not ordinary. Previously, because they were far away, she could not feel it clearly. However, as they got closer, she discovered that this lich's chanting was extremely powerful. Bailey Hongzhuang also looked at the lich in front of her. Previously, she was only able to resist the lich's chanting from a distance. She did not understand the chanting strength of the lich. Only now did she discover that this lich's chanting directly attacked the human brain. Moreover, it also had a certain effect on the blood. There was a slight difference between this sound wave and her zither music attack. Her zither music affected the entire body and did not focus on any particular part. However, she could still achieve this under her control. But when it came to attacking the blood, she was still inferior to him. In a short period of time, Bailey Hongzhuang had already understood why the lich's chanting was beneficial to the skeletons, but had a suppressive effect on the practitioners. Because the skeletons did not have a brain or blood, this attack had no effect on the skeletons. On the other hand, the chanting had a good effect on the strength of the skeletons, which could increase the fighting strength of the skeletons. However, the effect on the practitioners was different. The practitioners' blood and brain had already endured the impact of the sound wave, and their bones had also expanded. This kind of power would only cause the blood and body to surge even more, resulting in a body explosion effect. This kind of skeleton is really mysterious. Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but sigh. Not only did the human practitioners have all kinds of wisdom, even the fallen practitioners also had the power to turn something rotten into something magical. Bailey Hongzhuang's group slowed down. The skeleton stared at Bailey Hongzhuang from 100 meters away. It was clearly a pair of empty eyes, but she could still see the mischievous smile in them. Bailey Hongzhuang had a feeling that this lich was eyeing her. Do liches have intelligence? Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but ask. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's question, Rinzime couldn't help but stare blankly as she said, "It can't be. Liches shouldn't have any intelligence. Although they're a higher level than skeletons, there isn't much of a difference." Bailey Hongzhuang faintly glanced at Rinzime and retracted her gaze. She did not dwell on this issue. Obviously, Rinzime and the others didn't know much about this new lich, so her question was probably meaningless. However, Rode had a strong premonition that this lich had a mind of its own. The fact that it was staring at Rode meant that Rode was its biggest opponent. In the next second, Bailey Hongzhuang noticed a strange smile on the lich's face. Following that, the lich's chanting suddenly became louder, and the target of this chanting was obviously Rode. A sound wave attack directly attacked Bailey Hongzhuang. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang did not panic. She changed the sound of her zither, and an even stronger sound welcomed the lich's chanting. Zither. Chapter 3493. Seeing the result of the battle between Bailey Hongzhuang and the lich, the cultivators in the group were all shocked. Everyone, pay attention. Stand within the range of my zither's protection. Once you step out of the range, you will have to bear the combined effect of the two attacks. There's a high chance that your body will explode and you will die. Bailey Hongzhuang warned everyone. Following Bailey Hongzhuang's words, everyone realized the importance of this situation. They immediately maintained their distance from Bailey Hongzhuang, not daring to stray too far away. Bailey Hongzhuang's 5 fingers fluttered in the wind. The zither's music poured out faster and faster, causing everyone to be dazzled. At the same time, everyone could feel that the energy in the zither's music was getting denser and denser. Bailey Hongzhuang's spirit energy consumption was also increasing. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes were fixed on the lich not far away. This was a battle between her and the lich. Ding, ding, dang, dang. The sound of pearls falling on a jade plate continuously rang out. Compared to Wu Yao's unbearable chanting, Bailey Hongzhuang's zither music was much more pleasing to the ears. As Bailey Hongzhuang's zither music increased in intensity, everyone received Bailey Hongzhuang's protection. The unbearable feeling also lessened by a lot. In an instant, the situation was under control. The surrounding skeletons were also falling down. However, no one felt happy because the lich had successfully slowed down their movement speed, causing them to stay in the same place for a long time. Master, I'm afraid that we can't continue to stay in the same place. The speed of our advancement is too slow. Xiaohei frowned. If they didn't get rid of the lich quickly, they would have to stay here forever. Bailey Hongzhuang's zither music didn't stop. Her beautiful face also had a trace of seriousness. She originally wanted to use her zither music to get rid of the lich. However, after having a real battle with the lich, she realized that her skill in this aspect was actually not much different from the lich. It was obviously very difficult to subdue the lich in a short period of time. Bailey Hongzhuang tried to get closer to the lich. However, the lich was very cunning. When it saw Bailey Hongzhuang's intention to get closer, it retreated a bit. It also realized that Bailey Hongzhuang's strength was not weaker than it. If the two of them got closer, it wouldn't have any advantage. This lich is very cunning. Bailey Hongzhuang frowned. This wasn't a good thing. Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyes and looked in the direction of Di Beichun and the others. Originally, the distance of 1,000 meters had been reduced to 500 meters. Looking at this scene, Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze deepened. It was obvious that she was thinking about something. She couldn't use her zither music to get rid of the lich. The other cultivators couldn't get more than 10 meters away from her. In addition to the layers of skeletons, she had to find another way to get rid of the lich. Hongzhuang, what should we do next? Shang Wanning also noticed the terrible situation. She couldn't help but ask. Now, I can only take the risk and give it a try. Bailey Hongzhuang immediately said. Hearing this, Shang Wanning looked at Bailey Hongzhuang in surprise. She didn't know what Bailey Hongzhuang had thought of. Chapter 3494. However, she didn't expect Bailey Hongzhuang to actually come up with a solution. What solution do you have? Shang Wanning looked at Bailey Hongzhuang curiously and asked. Destroy with force. Bailey Hongzhuang narrowed her eyes. She could only try this method now. Shang Wanning and the others couldn't help but be stunned when they heard this. They didn't understand the true meaning of Bailey Hongzhuang's words. Bailey Hongzhuang didn't explain too much. Instead, she looked at Di Beichun, who was 500 meters away, and said, Beichun, I'm going to try the explosives. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Di Beichun immediately nodded. Okay, pay attention to the distance. Bailey Hongzhuang emphasized, You know the range. Understood. Di Beichun responded without hesitation. Previously, when they were in Wuji Palace, Bailey Hongzhuang often studied explosives with Nangong Wu. In the end, the explosives they developed were very effective. However, Bailey Hongzhuang didn't use them many times. She didn't prepare much in her Chinquan bag. At this moment, there were only 2 sets of explosives left in her Chinquan bag. Fortunately, the 2 sets of explosives were quite effective. It should be able to achieve a good effect in the current situation. However, these skeletons were also very strong. Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't be sure how far they could go. With a distance of a few hundred meters, she couldn't throw the explosives in the middle of their team. Otherwise, it was very likely that it would affect their own people. Therefore, she could only throw the explosives on both sides of the team. Once it exploded, it would be a circular attack range. Therefore, she had to choose a good location. On one hand, it wouldn't affect their own people. On the other hand, it could also eliminate the skeletons in front of them to a large extent. After everyone heard the conversation between Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichun, their expressions couldn't help but change. Explosives? Hearing this unfamiliar word, everyone only felt speechless for a while. Explosives could still be effective against low-level cultivators, but against cultivators who had reached the Purple Realm, explosives had no effect at all. What's more, there were several skeletons of the 3rd level of the Purple Realm within a 1-meter radius. Even if the explosives were used, they wouldn't be able to deal with a few skeletons. Wasn't that a joke? Those cultivating in the cave had been paying close attention to the situation of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others. When they heard Bailey Hongzhuang's words, they could not help but laugh. In my opinion, Bailey Hongzhuang is at her wit's end. She really can't think of any other way. She can even think of such a method. Is she dreaming? Explosives? I've only heard of these things when I was still in the Red Realm. Now that I've reached the Purple Realm, I'm afraid that these things won't affect me even if they explode next to me. They're too stupid to count on Bailey Hongzhuang. It's fine if she's going to die, but she's going to bring everyone to die with her. They'll regret it later. Everyone shook their heads. They looked at Bailey Hongzhuang and the others as if they were looking at a group of fools. In this world, heroes often didn't have good endings. Not only the cultivators in the cave, but Renzime and the others were also stunned after hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words. Hongzhuang, are you saying that we should use explosives to deal with these skeletons? Chapter 3495. After receiving Bailey Hongzhuang's confirmation, Renzime and the others couldn't help but look at each other. They didn't know where Bailey Hongzhuang's confidence came from, but at this point in time, they could only do as she said and give it a try. Ren Ziheng and the others' expressions were also very complicated. Previously, they thought that Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen's decisions were very reliable. But at this moment, they couldn't help but feel that this suggestion was too unbelievable. Junior D, will the explosives that Junior Bailey mentioned really work? Ren Ziheng's lips twitched. At this critical moment, they really couldn't joke about it. Di Beichen smiled slightly. After noticing the complicated expressions on Ren Ziheng and the others' faces, he couldn't help but say, "Don't worry, Hongzhuang's explosives are not the same as ordinary explosives. It should have some effect." The others didn't know, but Di Beichen was very familiar with the effects of Bailey Hongzhuang's explosives. Although the opponent's strength had increased by a lot, he believed that the destructive power was still not small. Hearing Di Beichen's reply, Ren Ziheng and the others looked at each other. Although they were very confused, they didn't question it again. After all, from the beginning until now, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others' performance had proved that they weren't people who would shoot without thinking. Since they said so, they must have some degree of confidence. "Moo!" Bailey Hongzhuang shouted coldly. The explosives in her hands were quickly ignited and thrown out. At the same time, she and Di Beichen's teams made the quickest choice. The Lich obviously didn't know what Bailey Hongzhuang was doing. He saw Bailey Hongzhuang suddenly throw a small package in his direction. He was puzzled, but he stood there and didn't dodge. Bailey Hongzhuang threw out the two explosives at the same time towards the east and west of the team. Set up the elemental energy shield. Bailey Hongzhuang quickly said to everyone. Following Bailey Hongzhuang's voice, everyone in the team didn't hesitate to use their elemental energy to set up layers of protective shields. The multiple layers of elemental energy shields stacked together, emitting a bright light, showing its sturdy strength. At this moment, everyone had already regarded Bailey Hongzhuang as the backbone of the team, so they didn't have any objections to her decision. Everyone in the cave couldn't help but laugh when they saw that the practitioners in Bailey Hongzhuang's team actually set up elemental energy shields. Am I seeing things? It's just a set of explosives, yet they actually need to erect an elemental energy barrier. Could it be that their brains have gone stupid? This is the most interesting thing I've seen since I came to Penglai Island. Don't tell me they want us to watch a joke before they die. What can this little bit of explosives do? I'm afraid it can't even take down two skeletons. Everyone shook their heads. Originally, when Bailey Hongzhuang made such a decision, they already thought it was ridiculous. They didn't expect that the people in the team still believed in her so much. They couldn't help but wonder if these people had been brainwashed. In fact, the practitioners in the team were also very confused. However, their trust in Bailey Hongzhuang was built up from the previous incident. Bang! Bang! Chapter 3496. Pung pung pung. The elemental energy ripples from the explosives kept hitting the elemental energy shield, creating ripples. Even though the shield was set up by everyone, it seemed like it could be broken at any time. The sudden movement was out of everyone's expectations. Other than Bailey Hongzhuang and a few others who had some understanding of the effects of the explosives, the rest of the practitioners could not help but be dumbfounded. What is this situation? Did I see wrongly? Is this the power of an explosive? I have never seen such a powerful explosive before. This has completely overturned my understanding. Everyone looked at the scene in front of them in a daze. This was simply too unbelievable for them. In their line of sight, on both sides of Bailey Hongzhuang, there were two huge pits. The surrounding skeletons were directly cleared out by the explosive. Cleared out. That's right. It was actually cleared out. The ground cracked inch by inch. The terrifying pit seemed to have gone through some kind of brutal attack. The lich who had been clamoring earlier was directly turned into nothingness by Bailey Hongzhuang's explosive. The surrounding skeletons that were protecting the lich were also turned into ashes. The place that was filled with skeletons suddenly had such a large, empty area. Everyone was somewhat unable to react. Gulp. Not knowing who swallowed a mouthful of saliva, the rest of the practitioners in the group also had the same conditioned reflexes. For a moment, everyone looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with eyes filled with disbelief and unimaginable shock. Looking at the effect in front of her, Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes revealed a touch of satisfaction. Although the effect was slightly worse than the one she had tested in the Limitless Palace, but the strength of these skeletons was not ordinary. It was normal for the effect to be reduced. Overall, this method of using the explosives was still very successful. Hongzhuang, the power of your explosives is really not ordinary. Shangguan Yingying's eyes were filled with surprise. She knew that Bailey Hongzhuang had a certain level of strength in explosives, but the effect was still much better than what she had expected. Rinzi looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with a beautiful expression. Junior Sister Bailey, you've overturned my understanding time and time again. If it wasn't for the fact that all of this was happening right in front of her eyes, Rinzi Mei would find it hard to believe that explosives could have such an amazing effect. She had never seen such a powerful explosive before. Under the continuous shock, she felt that Bailey Hongzhuang really had the power to turn something rotten into something magical. It was obviously impossible, but in Bailey Hongzhuang's hands, it became possible. Jing Tianlang didn't say anything either because he was so shocked that he didn't know what to say. There was a faint feeling of excitement in his heart. If they could have more of these explosives, at least when facing the skeleton army in the future, they would have a little more breathing room. They would not be chased until they had nowhere to run. He only wanted to know where Bailey Hongzhuang's explosives had come from. If he could purchase it, then it would be a trump card in this training grounds. At least at the critical moment, he could save his life. But obviously, now is not the time to ask about this. Chapter 3497. Junior Brother D, Junior Sister Bailey's explosives are too powerful. The corner of Chu Jinfeng's mouth twitched. Who told him that explosives were not powerful? Come out, I'll definitely not kill you. If this kind of explosive landed on his body without warning, he wouldn't even know how he died. It was really too scary. Looking at Chu Jinfeng's exaggerated appearance, Deep Beichen couldn't help but smile. The power of Hongzhuang's explosives is indeed extraordinary. At this time, it has a very good effect. Previously, he had forgotten that Bailey Hongzhuang still had explosives on her. At this time, the effect of the explosives was indeed excellent. This is called a very good effect. Chu Jinfeng was secretly speechless. This effect is simply heaven-defying. As he spoke, Chu Jinfeng couldn't help but look at Rin Ziheng. Rin Zixing, am I right? If we have more of these explosives, we'll have a much easier time. In this way, once they were surrounded by the skeleton army, they could directly use the explosives to escape. It was much better than being chased until they had nowhere to run. Rin Ziheng nodded. His gaze was still focused on the large pits on both sides of the road. The effect was too amazing. Until now, he still couldn't react. As far as he knew, explosives could never have such power. Why were the things that Bailey Hongzhuang took out completely different from what they usually saw? Not to mention the healing medicine, they usually couldn't even get their hands on it. Bailey Hongzhuang could take out so many at once. Now, with this kind of powerful explosives, just thinking about it, they knew that the price would be sky high. In fact, they hadn't even seen it before. Bailey Hongzhuang also took out the same thing. They were all humans, but the difference was too big. Indeed, the things that Junior Sister Bailey took out are all amazing things. Rin Ziheng couldn't help but sigh. He finally knew that Junior Sister Bailey was completely rich and overbearing. When these words were spoken, everyone in the group nodded in agreement. None of them had seen such a thing before. Today, not only had it saved their lives, it had also broadened their horizons. Ziren couldn't help but chuckle. In fact, he also admired Bailey Hongzhuang because Bailey Hongzhuang's attainments in these areas were simply too astonishing. Thinking about it, no matter who it was, when they saw Bailey Hongzhuang's abilities, they would have a feeling of anger. Fortunately, he had long been used to it. The skeletons on both sides of the road have been cleared. Let's hurry over. Although everyone was very surprised by the effect of Bailey Hongzhuang's explosives, they did not forget the danger they were in. Now that the skeletons on both sides of the road were gone, it was the best time for them to hurry. In the next moment, everyone quickened their pace and flew towards Bailey Hongzhuang and the others. Without the obstruction of the skeletons, the distance of a few hundred meters could be covered in the blink of an eye. Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze fell on the place where the lich was. She didn't expect that the zither technique couldn't kill the lich. In the end, the lich died under the effect of the explosives. It seemed that simple violence was the most effective in the end. Chapter 3498. Master, the power of your explosives is really not to be underestimated. Xiaohei could not help but sigh when she saw the destructive power of the explosives. Even if they were to unleash their martial arts techniques with all their might, they would only be able to clear out a small group of skeletons. However, the power of the explosives completely ignored all forms of power. Who could compare to the effect of clearing out the skeletons? Bailey Hongzhuang nodded. I feel that when we become inner palace disciples and come to this training ground again, we must bring more explosives with us. She only had 2 sets of explosives on her at the moment. Once they were used up, they would be gone. However, it was enough to solve today's urgent situation. If she were to come here again in the future, she would bring more explosives with her as a form of security. Master's right. No other method is as simple and violent as this. Xiaobai's eyes sparkled brightly. Previously, when she saw the densely packed skeletons swarming towards them, it had caused her scalp to turn numb. Now that she had cleared out 2 groups of skeletons, she felt much more comfortable. Very soon, Di Beichen and his group had arrived beside Bailey Hongzhuang's group. The surrounding skeletons were also quickly catching up to them. However, their speed was still a little slower than Di Beichen's group. When she saw Di Beichen standing in front of her, Bailey Hongzhuang's elegant and refined face could not help but reveal a joyful smile. My dear wife, it's been hard on you. Di Beichen smiled at Bailey Hongzhuang and gave her a thumbs up. His expression was filled with pride. Bailey Hongzhuang's performance today was truly outstanding. If she had not come to save them, the possibility of them returning to this place would have been too small. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled and glanced at the group behind Di Beichen. When she saw that everyone was safe and sound, she could not help but say, "Let's go back to the cave first. Let's take advantage of the fact that these skeletons are unable to catch up to us and return to a safe place first." Although she had used explosives to clear out 2 areas, the skeletons were not slow. It would not take long for them to completely cover the area again. With their current state of elemental energy, if they were to be surrounded by the skeletons again, it would be extremely difficult for them to return. Thus, they had to seize this opportunity. Everyone nodded. They also knew that now was the time to seize the opportunity. Immediately, the 2 teams merged together and rushed towards the cave. When everyone in the cave saw that Bailey Hongzhuang and the others had successfully regrouped, their expressions changed. This was something that they thought was impossible, but they actually succeeded. In comparison, if Bailey Hongzhuang and the others had died in the hands of the skeletons, they might feel a little better. But now that they had returned safely, they had become the laughingstock instead. With everyone's concerted efforts, they successfully returned to the cave. Without the lich's chanting ability, the skeleton's combat strength returned to how it was before, and it wasn't that difficult to deal with them. The moment they entered the cave, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. I didn't think that we would be able to return alive. It was unknown which practitioner took the lead to sigh with emotion. The practitioners in D-Bachan's team all nodded their heads. This was the biggest feeling in their hearts at this moment. Chapter 3499. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others all heaved a sigh of relief, a relaxed smile appearing on their faces. Their previous actions were indeed very risky, but now that they had all returned safely, they were exceptionally happy. Junior Sister Bailey, your performance today has really opened our eyes. Chu Jinfeng smiled as he looked at Bailey Hongzhuang. Your zither technique is truly amazing. If it wasn't for you keeping the Lich in check, it would have been much more difficult for us to complete this mission. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled slightly, her exquisite face becoming even more beautiful. I just hit the jackpot, and it just so happened that it had a certain suppressive effect. If it wasn't for the fact that she had met the Lich today, she wouldn't have known that her zither technique was able to contend against the Lich. Now that she thought about it, it was really interesting. In the past, when we met the Lich, we were really helpless. This time, we met 4 Lich, and even getting close to them was extremely difficult. If it wasn't for you, our situation would have been very dangerous. Ren Ziheng smiled faintly, looking at Bailey Hongzhuang with eyes full of appreciation and gratitude. No matter what, Bailey Hongzhuang had helped them greatly this time. If it wasn't for her, he was almost certain that he wouldn't have been able to keep his life. Big brother, we really have to thank Junior Sister Bailey for being able to return safely this time. If it wasn't for Junior Sister Bailey taking the lead and asking to receive you, I'm afraid that no one would have stood out. Ren Zimei said bluntly. If it wasn't for Bailey Hongzhuang taking the lead and using such influential words to rally everyone, no one would have gone out to receive them. She was very clear in her heart that if it wasn't for Bailey Hongzhuang's existence, even if she had tried her best to rally everyone, she wouldn't have been able to achieve such an effect. After all, their previous actions were no different from courting death in everyone's eyes. When she thought about how if she hadn't stood out, Ren Ziheng would have left her forever, her heart was filled with fear. Hearing Ren Zimei's words, Ren Ziheng and the others all looked at Bailey Hongzhuang. They didn't doubt Ren Zimei's words at all. In fact, when they saw Bailey Hongzhuang and the others coming out to receive them, their hearts were filled with shock. This was because no one would normally make such a choice. Indeed, we took the risk and listened to Junior Sister Bailey's suggestion. Fortunately, the result was good. A smile appeared on Jing Tianlong's face. When he had first heard the news, he also felt that Bailey Hongzhuang's actions was too crazy. But in the end, he was still influenced by Bailey Hongzhuang's words. And now, he was even more glad that he had listened to her suggestion. For a time, Bailey Hongzhuang's position in the hearts of Ren Ziheng's people was different. They knew all too well that the previous situation was really dangerous. According to their usual thinking, in order to reduce the losses to the minimum, most people would not choose to stand out. However, not only did Bailey Hongzhuang stand out herself, she even brought everyone with her. Most importantly, Bailey Hongzhuang really turned the situation around and changed the final outcome. In this regard, Bailey Hongzhuang was undoubtedly their savior. Chapter 3500. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Ren Ziheng's men didn't hesitate and immediately looked at the other cultivators in the team. Instantly, everyone bowed together. Thank you for saving us, brothers and sisters. They knew too well what kind of friendship it was to be able to step forward in such a dangerous situation. If it wasn't for them, the other party wouldn't have risked their lives to save them. This deep affection was far from being able to be expressed with just a few words. It had to be engraved in one's heart. Looking at the actions of Ren Ziheng's men, Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest revealed smiles on their faces. This is what we should do. There's no need to be so courteous. Didn't you go out to fight the liches so that we can live safely? That's right. There's no need for such formalities between brothers. From now on, we're brothers who share life and death together. After experiencing life and death, everyone felt completely different. Perhaps in the past, they still had selfish thoughts in their hearts, but after experiencing this incident, this selfishness had gradually dissipated and was replaced by an indescribable trust. No matter who it was extremely precious to have a friend who was willing to sacrifice their life for them. Obviously, after experiencing the incident just now, everyone had reached such a level of trust. No matter who it was, this was a great benefit. Compared to Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest who were happy and harmonious, the other cultivators in the cave had strange expressions on their faces. Previously, they didn't choose to step forward. Now that everyone had returned safely, it showed their selfishness instead. Regarding this, Ren Ziheng and the others naturally knew the reason why these people did not step forward. However, no one said anything, as it was good that they were well aware of it. At least after this incident, they knew who they could truly rely on and who wasn't suitable to be close to. The atmosphere in the cave became somewhat awkward, but everyone still stood outside the cave in an orderly manner to resist the attacks of the skeleton army. After the 4 liches were dealt with, the strength of the skeleton army seems to have weakened, and the frequency of their attacks seems to be less than before. Shangguan Yingying looked at the skeleton army that was constantly attacking outside the cave. She could keenly feel that the situation had changed. Hearing Shangguan Yingying's words, everyone turned to look outside the cave. After taking a closer look, everyone also noticed this difference. It's true. Xiren's eyes lit up. He was previously surrounded by the skeleton army, so he was very familiar with the attack frequency of the skeleton army. Now that he carefully sensed it, he discovered the difference between the two. Ren Ziheng sized up and said, "The liches are an existence of a higher level than the skeleton army. Now that the liches are collectively dead, the skeleton army is also suppressed, so their strength is not as before." Jing Tianlang nodded. "That's right. It's not far from daybreak. I believe the skeleton army will leave soon." As soon as this was said, a bright smile appeared on everyone's face. Chapter 3501. After the previous torment, we don't have much primary energy left in our bodies. Fortunately, it's not early now. I believe there won't be a problem to hold on until dawn. Chu Jinfeng's face was filled with a satisfied smile. This night, they persevered with great difficulty, but when they got through it, the joy was indescribable. Di Bei-chun stood by Bailey Hongzhuang's side, his handsome face as sharp as a knife, rippling with a faint, gentle, and doting smile. Did I make wifey worry before? Even though he was far away, he could still see the worry and nervousness in Bailey Hongzhuang's concerned eyes. Bailey Hongzhuang stared at Di Bei-chun. Her cherry-red lips pouted slightly, revealing a coquettish expression. "What do you think? In the future, you have to pay more attention to such dangerous things. You can't leave me here alone." If she didn't happen to have 2 sets of explosives in her hands, their current situation would be extremely dangerous. Hearing this, Di Bei-chun's lips curled into a faint smile. He nodded and said, "I will pay attention in the future." In today's situation, he and Wenziren had no other choice but to make such a choice. After all, they were all cultivators in good physical condition. No one was more suitable than them to stand out. If they had chosen to retreat at that time, they would have no face to see the other cultivators in the inner hall. Since they had chosen to live well in Penglai Palace, they naturally could not let themselves fall into such a situation. Moreover, such a choice could better protect Bailey Hongzhuang and Shangguan Yingying. "My wife, it's all thanks to your protection today." Di Bei-chun was full of smiles. "Now everyone knows that my wife is not ordinary." Bailey Hongzhuang glanced at Di Bei-chun. "You are still in the mood to joke at a time like this." Di Bei-chun spread out his hands, the smile on his face unchanged. "Now that we've overcome most of the crisis, we can hold on until dawn. What else is there to worry about?" When Xiren also walked to Di Bei-chun's side, "Hongzhuang, Yingying, your performance today was really outstanding. I have to commend you." Looking at Xiren's appearance, Bailey Hongzhuang and Shangguan Yingying looked at each other, and both of them chose to ignore him. The sky gradually brightened. When the last trace of darkness disappeared, the skeleton army retreated like a tide and drilled into the ground. Looking at the world that had returned to normal, a relaxed smile appeared on everyone's faces. It's finally daybreak. The darkness before dawn is truly terrifying. I didn't think that we would be able to survive after encountering 4 deep pits. We are really lucky. Now we can finally rest for a while. My mental state has been tense for the whole night. I can't take it anymore. Everyone took a deep breath. This night was probably the longest and most difficult for them to endure. Every minute that passed seemed exceptionally long. Fortunately, they managed to endure until dawn. The exhausted cultivators immediately closed their eyes and began to rest. The exhaustion of mental energy and elemental energy for the entire night was truly frightening. If they didn't recover as soon as possible, none of them knew what kind of situation they would encounter tonight. Chapter 3502. After a night of battle, I'm sure everyone is exhausted. Let's take advantage of the fact that there won't be any more skeletons to disturb us. Let's quickly recover. Ren Ziheng glanced at everyone present. Although everyone's faces were brimming with joy, he could still see the exhaustion between their brows. After an entire night, everyone was simply too exhausted. Hence, what they needed the most now was a good rest. Hearing Ren Ziheng's words, everyone nodded their heads. Previously, they were immersed in their excitement and did not pay much attention to their own exhaustion. Now that they had relaxed, they felt an indescribable sense of exhaustion spreading throughout their body. That's right. Everyone, let's have a good rest first. Chu Jinfeng followed closely. Everyone was not pretentious. Only 2 cultivators were left to guard the situation outside the cave. The rest of the cultivators began to cultivate and recover their vitality. Bailey Hongzhuang closed her eyes and began to circulate the heaven-defying mental cultivation method. The elemental energy in her body had been squeezed dry. This feeling was extremely uncomfortable. Although there would not be any danger during the day, there was still one night before they had to leave this training ground. After what happened last night, none of them could be sure of what would happen on this last night. If this kind of thing happened again, they would really be unable to bear it. Originally, their group was full of injured cultivators. After last night's battle, their injuries were more serious than before. Furthermore, many of them had fallen. Not to mention the huge decrease in their battle strength. Their numbers had also decreased sharply. One could imagine how bad the situation was. However, now that they had reached this stage, everyone had no other choice. The only thing they could do was to recover their energy to the peak and maintain their best condition. They could only pray that they would not encounter such a thing again tonight. The cave regained its tranquility. Only the sound of everyone's breathing could be heard. The original large group had gathered and was divided into 2 camps. Between both sides, there was a sense of awkwardness. However, no one directly pointed it out. Both sides also maintained a certain distance from each other. Ren Ziheng's group also had some resentment in their hearts. They set out to deal with the Lich so that everyone could have a better life. However, after they had sacrificed so much, these fellows completely ignored them in order to protect their own lives. It could be seen that their hearts were cold. Although the cultivators felt a little guilty, they didn't feel that they had done anything wrong, so they didn't say anything else. In the afternoon, Bailey Hongzhuang finally opened her eyes. Previously, the elemental energy in her dantian had been completely depleted, and the feeling of exhaustion was extremely uncomfortable. However, after she replenished the elemental energy in her dantian, she only felt that the capacity of her dantian had expanded a little compared to before. It was as if she had made some progress. She had experienced this kind of situation before, but the effect was not as good as this time. After thinking about it carefully, she understood that this was because everyone had channeled their origin power into her body, helping her expand the capacity of her dantian. Speaking of which, this could be considered as a fluke. It was originally a very risky move, but she didn't expect to reap such benefits in the end. It seemed that the saying that danger and opportunity coexisted was not false at all. Chapter 3503. If she were to encounter such a situation again, she might not be able to confidently leave her back to the other cultivators. After all, it was hard to tell what was in a person's heart. Fortunately, she had won the bet this time. If these people were not inner palace disciples but outer palace disciples, it would definitely not have happened. After Bailey Hongzhuang exited her cultivation state, she realized that most of the other cultivators had recovered to their best condition. At this moment, they were all immersed in the joy of surviving a great disaster. Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang had opened her eyes, Ren Ziheng and the others' gazes fell on Bailey Hongzhuang. "Junior sister Bailey, you've recovered?" Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. Her clear eyes revealed some surprise. She did not expect to be watched by so many people when she opened her eyes. She immediately smiled and said, "Yes, I've recovered." The smile on Ren Ziheng's face became gentler. He said, "Junior sister Bailey, may I ask where you got the explosives from?" Ever since he had witnessed the power of the explosives used by Bailey Hongzhuang, Ren Ziheng had been constantly thinking about the explosives. If he could also obtain the explosives, it would undoubtedly be more secure when he came to this training ground in the future. Not only Ren Ziheng, but the others were also extremely enthusiastic about this question. At this moment, seeing that Ren Ziheng had taken the initiative to ask this question, everyone naturally could not help but pay attention. Even those cultivators who had previously refused to go out with Bailey Hongzhuang quietly pricked up their ears. If there was a chance, they would definitely think of a way to buy the explosives back. "Yes, junior sister Bailey, I've never heard of the power of your explosives. It really surprised me." Chu Jinfeng looked curiously at Bailey Hongzhuang. He had long wanted to ask, but his body's condition was really too bad previously. Therefore, he could only put this question in his heart and wait until his Yuan Li recovered before asking. Looking at everyone's curious look, Bailey Hongzhuang smiled and said, "I brought these explosives from the outside world. There are only 2 sets in total. Previously, I had almost forgotten about the existence of these explosives. I didn't expect them to be so effective." As soon as these words were spoken, everyone couldn't help but feel slightly disappointed. However, they weren't surprised by this outcome. After all, if such a powerful explosive was a product of Penglai Island, it would have been famous long ago. It was impossible for them not to have heard of it. However, since the explosives were brought from the outside by Bailey Hongzhuang, then the idea of buying the explosives would have to be dispelled. In that case, we won't be able to buy this explosive in the future. Ren Ziheng was a little unwilling to give up. It was not easy to find such a useful tool, but he did not expect that it would be useless in the end. Bailey Hongzhuang turned to look at Di Beichen. Di Beichen gave her a trusting smile. No matter what choice Bailey Hongzhuang made, he would support her. That may not be the case. If there is, I will inform Senior Brother Ren. How about that? She indeed only had 2 sets of explosives on her, and she had already used them up. If she wanted to make more, it would be a very simple matter for her. Chapter 3504. During the time they spent together, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 had shown a lot of strength. As Outer Palace disciples, they were taken care of by Master Long. In the end, they were treated as a thorn in the side of all the Outer Palace disciples and were targeted everywhere. Now, in the process of getting along with the Inner Palace disciples, although they felt that it was very good, it was not a good thing to show off too much. The hunter shoots the bird that sticks out. If their performance was too outstanding, it was very likely that they would be targeted by their opponents. Unless they had a firm foothold in Penglai Palace and had enough status, all these problems would naturally disappear. As a new cultivator, it was best to be neither servile nor overbearing. Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang was not dead set, Ren Ziheng's eyes couldn't help but brighten. He quickly said, "Then I'll have to trouble Junior sister. If you have these explosives, you must help me keep them. No matter what the price, I can accept it." Although the outside world and Penglai Island were quite far away, some cultivators would still go back from time to time. Perhaps Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were like this. "Junior sister Bailey, don't forget about me. I also need this explosive." Chu Jinfeng followed closely. He had seen the benefits of this explosive. He must not give up such a good opportunity. "Yes, yes, yes. Junior sister Bailey, me too. Help me get one too." "Me too." Everyone spoke out one after another. They just wanted to get familiar with Bailey Hongzhuang. This kind of life-saving trump card, everyone wanted to have it. Even if they were not facing skeletons, as long as they were in a dangerous situation, they could often achieve unexpected results by throwing this explosive. Looking at everyone's anxious appearance, Bailey Hongzhuang nodded repeatedly and said, "If I have the explosive, I will definitely inform everyone." It was not until Bailey Hongzhuang said this sentence that everyone was relieved. Shangguan, Yingying, and the others could not help but look at each other. There was a trace of a smile in their eyes. I finally realized that Hongzhuang is a money tree. No matter what you bring out, it will sell like hotcakes. Shangguan Yingying's eyes flashed with amazement. They just came to this training ground by chance. First, they learned that Bailey Hongzhuang's healing medicine had a good effect on the injuries caused by skeletons. This had already determined that the healing medicine would sell well. Usually, explosives were completely neglected. Who would have thought that it would become a treasure that everyone was fighting over? Looking at the situation, if this explosive was taken out, the price would definitely rise. Not only that, it was likely that the supply would still exceed the demand. She could imagine what kind of situation it would be at that time. Just this Penglai Palace alone could reach such a level. Presumably, it would also be fought over by other forces. That situation was truly... Zyron nodded in agreement. Beichen has really found a rich woman. In this situation, Hongzhuang will not starve to death no matter where she is. On the contrary, she can mix with the wind and water. But we are different. Di Beichen raised his eyebrows. His handsome face was filled with a proud and evil smile. My wife is naturally not an ordinary person. You can be envious and jealous. Your skin is getting thicker and thicker. Zyron shook his head speechlessly. Can you be any more shameless? Di Beichen thought for a moment and said, You don't have the life to be kept. Chapter 35:05. Rinzime, I won the bet this time. You can't go back on your word when we get back. Chu Jinfeng smiled and looked at Rinzime, who was not far away. His long eyebrows were slightly raised, and his handsome face was full of ridicule. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others couldn't help but look at Rinzime. Speaking of which, the cause of this matter was still them. If Chu Jinfeng hadn't chosen to believe them, then naturally, this matter wouldn't have happened. However, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were still very satisfied with helping Chu Jinfeng and Rinzime to advance to the next step. Looking at Chu Jinfeng's proud appearance, Rinzime's pretty face showed a touch of stubbornness and said, When did I go back on my word? No problem. That's good. Chu Jinfeng's eyes lit up. Usually, it wasn't easy for him to ask Rinzime out. Just thinking about it made him not know how to open his mouth. Now, he finally had such a good opportunity. The most important thing was that after learning from Zyron, he found that what he did before was indeed not enough. He hoped that this time, he could make a breakthrough. It's too early for you to be happy. There is still a day before we go back. Who knows if something unexpected will happen tonight? Rinzime wasn't as optimistic as Chu Jinfeng. What happened last night made her feel a lingering fear. As long as they didn't go back, none of them could guarantee that they would live until then. As Rinzime's voice fell, everyone's expression became very complicated. This was also the problem they were most worried about. I hope that we can get through tonight safely. Our team really can't afford to be tossed around again. Shangguan Yingying sighed. She hadn't seen the skeleton army before. Just listening to Rinzime and the others' description, she was a little unconcerned. However, after seeing all this with her own eyes, she knew how terrible the night here was. If possible, she never wanted to see these annoying guys again. This kind of battle formation was completely surrounded. There was no place to escape. She really didn't want to experience it again. Everyone nodded. Their team had already shrunk by nearly half. If something like this happened again tonight, then none of them would be able to bear it. We won't go back to our previous place tonight. Let's stay in this cave. It's safer with a cave entrance. Ren Zihang said. All right. Just as everyone was chatting, a voice suddenly entered everyone's ears. Ren Zihang, why are you here? Hearing this unexpected voice, everyone immediately looked outside the cave. They saw a group of cultivators standing outside the cave, looking curiously at Ren Zihang's group. Seeing the sudden appearance of the team, Ren Ziheng was stunned for a moment before a joyful smile appeared on his face. Duan Huali, why are you here? Duan Huali chuckled. Originally, we planned to go back the next time the teleportation array opens, but we have a lot of injured people in our team, so we might as well take this opportunity to go back. With that said, Duan Huali also noticed the large number of skeletons outside the cave. He couldn't help but ask, were you attacked last night? Why are there so many skeletons outside this cave? Chapter 3506. Ren Ziheng nodded with a serious expression on his face. There was indeed a battle last night, and the situation was completely beyond our imagination. Seeing Ren Ziheng's serious expression, Duan Huali couldn't help but retract his smile, and a serious expression emerged on his face. What happened? Looking at your expression, the situation doesn't seem to be ordinary serious. Yesterday, for deep pits actually appeared here. This is something that has never happened before. This is a safe zone, Ren Ziheng said. For deep pits? Duan Huali raised his voice. His face was filled with disbelief. Did I hear wrongly? If 4 deep pits appeared, how did you all survive? Duan Huali was a little suspicious. Usually, it was already very difficult for everyone to deal with a single deep pit. If 4 deep pits appeared, there was no other result other than a complete wipeout. However, Ren Ziheng and the others were obviously safe and sound. Although there were many injured people in the team, Ren Ziheng was originally responsible for taking care of the injured people this time, so it was normal for there to be injured people in the team. Speaking of which, we were lucky. We did our best to last until dawn. Ren Ziheng sighed. The situation last night was still vivid in his mind. He was very clear in his heart that if it wasn't for Bailey Hongzhuang's zither technique that coincidentally countered the Lich's chanting, it was basically impossible for them to survive. It was precisely because of this that he was very grateful to Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 4 Outer Hall disciples who accidentally came here. Speaking of which, he was really thankful that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 accidentally came here. If they didn't come here, they would have most likely lost their lives by now. If 4 deep pits appeared, there should be a lich, right? Duan Huali still didn't believe what Ren Ziheng said. Not to mention bringing a group of injured people. Even if he brought a group of cultivators in excellent condition, it would only lead to a dead end under such circumstances. He only felt that Ren Ziheng was making up a story. Could it be that he wanted to use this method to show how powerful he was? Of course, Ren Ziheng's expression was serious. 4 liches appeared last night, and we discovered that one of them seems to have evolved. The influence of its chanting is stronger than the others. I'm afraid we'll have to report this news when we get back. Liches have evolved, so we'll have to be more careful in the future. Following Ren Ziheng's words, Duan Huali and the other cultivators in Duan Huali's team all had expressions of disbelief on their faces. Ren Ziheng, what you're saying is too far-fetched. If there were 4 liches, you wouldn't have survived. Duan Huali couldn't help but shake his head. This kind of thing could deceive people who had never seen a lich before, but it was impossible to deceive them. They often fought with the skeleton army, so they understood it very well. No matter how they thought about it, they knew that it was impossible. What my big brother said is the truth. If we didn't see the situation last night with our own eyes, I'm afraid no one would believe it. Rinzame didn't feel that Duan Huali's behavior was strange. In fact, if they didn't personally experience the scene last night, they wouldn't believe it even if others told them. Chapter 3507. Rinzame, what you said doesn't make any sense at all. It's really hard to believe. Indeed, usually, when a team encounters a deep pit, it will be very troublesome. Your team is full of injured people. Although you have more people, facing 4 skeletons and 4 liches in the pit, no matter what, you won't be able to last until dawn. Don't tell me that you are too happy to see us, so you deliberately made up a joke with us. The practitioners in Duan Huali's team looked at Ren Ziheng and the others with a smile. Obviously, they didn't believe what they said at all. Seeing this, Ren Ziheng and Run Zime looked at each other. The two of them didn't intend to continue talking. Since the other party already thought that they were joking, no matter what they said, the other party wouldn't believe them. Wasting more words would only be a waste of time. If you don't believe it, then forget it. Ren Ziheng waved his hand and continued, since you are planning to go back tomorrow, then you might as well go back together. It will be safer at night. Duan Huali nodded. Of course, that's no problem. I hope that we can still encounter the situation you said at night, so that we can broaden our horizons. Haha. Hearing the mockery in Duan Huali's words, Ren Ziheng and the others were too lazy to say anything more. Then you should also find a place to rest in the cave. I hope that tonight will be safe. How can that be? Duan Huali shook his head. It would be best if 4 liches appeared. We have never seen such a grand occasion before. Shangguan Yingying looked at Duan Huali at the entrance of the cave and couldn't help but frown. Why does this Duan Huali speak with such mockery? It makes people feel uncomfortable. Chu Jinfeng chuckled. This guy's always been self-righteous. As long as he hasn't seen it before, he will think that it is impossible. You just have to get used to it. In the inner hall, there are many arrogant people like him. So you're saying that this Duan Huali is very strong? Xiren asked curiously. Chu Jinfeng nodded. Although I despise this guy's character, I have to say that he is indeed very strong. It is because he is strong that he always speaks with a bit of arrogance. In the inner palace, those with strength have the right to be arrogant. However, those who walk different paths cannot make plans together. There are too many people who are unhappy to look at, so we just ignore them. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others looked at each other. In a place like this, there are all kinds of people. The more powerful a person was, the more they thought they were the best. This kind of situation was human nature. From the conversation between Duan Huali and Ren Ziheng, it was clear that Duan Huali was somewhat disdainful of Ren Ziheng. Ren Ziheng was too lazy to explain later on, which also showed that Ren Ziheng was not the same kind of person. That's true. There are all kinds of birds in the sea. Shangguan Yingying shrugged her shoulders. No matter where one was, there would always be people who could hit it off with them. At the same time, there would also be people who could not stand the sight of them. With the addition of Duan Huali and the others, everyone felt a bit more at ease. Originally, there were too few people in their group, so they couldn't help but worry. However, now that there were more people, even if they were unlucky and encountered danger again, at least they had a chance to survive. Chapter 3508. Stunning. This was Duan Huali's first impression when he saw Bailey Hongzhuang. He had never seen such a stunning woman. Her skin was whiter than snow, and her temperament was noble as if she was carved by God. Her perfect face was flawless. Even the most ordinary clothes of Penglai Palace revealed a completely different beauty and brilliance on her body. It was unforgettable. However, Duan Huali quickly recovered. He was far from losing his composure like an ordinary pig. After looking carefully, Duan Huali couldn't help but ask Ren Ziheng. These people look very unfamiliar. Are they disciples who just joined the inner hall? Seeing that Duan Huali noticed Bailey Hongzhuang and others at a glance, Ren Ziheng was not surprised. In fact, with the temperament of Bailey Hongzhuang and others, it was difficult to ignore them no matter where they were. They are not inner hall disciples. Duan Huali was slightly stunned. Not inner hall disciples? What does that mean? They're outer hall disciples who just joined, but they were tricked and came to the wrong teleportation circle. You know, Ren Ziheng raised his eyebrows. They had heard of this kind of thing. As long as he said it, he believed that Duan Huali would understand. I see. Duan Huali suddenly understood. So, didn't they also experience the battle last night? Yes, although the 4 of them are still outer hall disciples, their performance last night was very outstanding. I believe it won't be long before they become inner hall disciples. Ren Ziheng's eyes were full of appreciation. When he went back tomorrow, he would tell the inner hall mentors about the excellent performance of Bailey Hongzhuang and others. He believed that the mentors would also look at them in a new light. As long as they got the mentors' attention, it would also be excellent for the future development of Bailey Hongzhuang and others in Penglai Palace. Oh, Duan Huali's eyebrows showed a touch of surprise. It's rare to see you praise cultivators so much. This proves that they are really outstanding. Ren Ziheng smiled faintly. Duan Huali slowly walked in front of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. His handsome and extraordinary face was still filled with arrogance as he smiled faintly. I heard that although the four of you are Outer Palace disciples, your performance in dealing with the skeletons last night was very outstanding. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others could not help but feel surprised when they saw Duan Huali's attention land on them. They originally had no intention of interacting with Duan Huali. Senior brother, you flatter us. We're just trying our best to do what we should do, Di Beichun said slowly. Duan Huali glanced at Di Beichun. He had already noticed Di Beichun's existence. In fact, the four of them were very good-looking and would be noticed at a glance. Junior brother, you're too humble. Usually, Outer Palace disciples are unable to return after coming to the wrong place. The fact that you're able to last until today is already proof that you're not bad. Duan Huali laughed softly with a hint of ridicule in his voice. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three's expressions didn't change, but their hearts were faintly unhappy. Inexplicably, such a guy had come in front of them to show off his might. This was not something that made them feel happy. Junior sister, how do you address me? Duan Huali asked. As soon as these words came out, Di Beichun and Xiren could not help but look at each other. They already understood the purpose of Duan Huali's visit. Chapter 3509. Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang's attitude towards him was extremely cold, and she did not show any enthusiasm, even though he was an Inner Palace disciple, Duan Huali was somewhat dissatisfied. With his status in the Inner Palace, he had always had hundreds of responses. Many women wanted to become his woman, but he usually did not take a fancy to them. Generally speaking, he only needed one look, and the other party would take the initiative to approach him. He did not expect Bailey Hongzhuang's attitude to be so cold. It was really beyond his expectations. So if it's Junior sister Bailey. Duan Huali smiled faintly. I'm Duan Huali, an Inner Palace disciple. In the future, if you need my help in Penglai Palace, you can tell me directly. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang smiled and said, Then I'll thank you in advance, Senior Brother Duan. Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang had only said a word of thanks indifferently, as if she did not take him to heart, Duan Huali quietly frowned. However, he did not find it too strange. After all, there were very few women who could catch his fancy. Bailey Hongzhuang's appearance was so outstanding that there must be many men pursuing her. Naturally, she would have a certain amount of arrogance. If she took the bait so easily, it would not be fun. It was this kind of indifference that made him more interested. You want to know if Bailey Hongzhuang would still have such a cold and frosty appearance when he caught up with her. Rinzime looked at Duan Huali's behavior and could not help but have a sarcastic look in her eyes. I'm afraid that Duan Huali has taken a fancy to Junior Sister Bailey. Ren Ziheng glanced at Duan Huali indifferently and said, This fits his personality very well. He usually thinks that he's elegant and charming thousands of girls. However, this time, he's doomed to fail. That's good. I really want to see this guy's face when he's defeated. Ren Zimei shrugged. Every time she saw this guy's arrogant look, she could not help but want to give him a punch. Ren Ziheng frowned slightly. Junior Sister Bailey is now being targeted by Duan Huali. I'm afraid that it will be troublesome. However, Duan Huali will not go too far. It shouldn't be too troublesome. Hearing Ren Ziheng's words, Renzime immediately understood what he meant and said, When the time comes, just tell him that Junior Marshal Sister Bailey and Junior Marshal Brother D are a couple. This guy won't continue to be so stubborn, right? Quite a number of Inner Palace female disciples have been harmed by him, and I feel unhappy whenever I see him. Lower your voice. Ren Ziheng lowered his voice. Although Duan Huali's character isn't that great, his strength is indeed not weak. There's no benefit in offending him. Just bear with it for a while. We're going back tomorrow anyway. Renzime nodded. Okay. When Duan Huali saw that Bailey Hongzhuang and the others didn't have the slightest interest in talking to him, he also felt a little embarrassed. He usually liked to show off in front of the new disciples, and when he felt their worshipful gazes, he felt very happy. However, this time, he did not feel this from Bailey Hongzhuang and the others. He could not help but feel a little disappointed. Did you just become outer disciples? Duan Huali asked. Yes. When Zyra nodded, we just joined Penglai Palace. Chapter 35:10. As Duan Huali's voice fell, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three couldn't help but look at each other. They also felt that what the former said was true. Their popularity in the outer palace could no longer be described as bad. It was completely bad to the extreme. Not to mention the cultivators who died in their hands. It was useless no matter how much they hated them, because it could not have any impact on Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. As for those cultivators who had lowered their cultivation because of them, they had already become a thorn in their side. In the future, when they cultivated in the outer hall, they had to be on guard at all times. The slightest carelessness could cause them to be schemed against. At least, this time, they were tricked to the point that they almost couldn't go back alive. Speaking of which, they had many opponents in the outer palace, but they had no friends. Presumably, in the entire Penglai Palace, there were only a few cultivators who could do to their level. Seeing a touch of helplessness on the faces of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three, Duan Huali knew that he had hit the nail on the head. Suddenly, the smile in his eyes deepened. It doesn't matter if you were tricked. After all, you will always encounter some opponents outside. If you can't solve it, I can help you solve it. Duan Huali smiled. No matter what, I still have some face in this Penglai Palace. As long as I spread the word, absolutely no one will dare to trouble you again. With that, Duan Huali's face could not help but become more arrogant. This was his influence in Penglai Palace. With his strength, everyone in the inner palace had to give him face, let alone the outer palace. However, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were not so optimistic about this. Those guys' cultivation had dropped so much because of them. This kind of hatred, even if it was not irreconcilable, was still a deep hatred. Not to mention Duan Huali saying it. Even if Master Long stood up and said it, it would not be able to eliminate this hatred. However, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others did not regret doing all this. After all, those guys were the first to have evil thoughts about them. They deserved to be punished. Thank you for your kindness, Senior Brother Duan, but we should handle this kind of thing ourselves. Deep Beichen looked indifferent and said indifferently. He did not have any good feelings for anyone who wanted to show off in front of his wife, let alone this extremely arrogant guy in front of him. However, this fellow's performance wasn't too excessive for the time being. Other than being a little arrogant, a little infuriating, and a little annoying, everything else was all right. Otherwise, even if the other party was an inner palace disciple, he wouldn't have let him off so easily. How should I address you, junior brother? Seeing Di Bei Chun acting like the backbone of the team, Duan Huali couldn't help but ask. He didn't know why, but he always felt that this guy in front of him was especially unpleasant. Perhaps it was because this guy was more handsome than him. I am Di Bei Chun. So it's junior brother D. Duan Huali nodded. Although the outer palace disciples are not as strong as the inner palace disciples, they should not be underestimated. I advise junior brother D not to be too arrogant. If something goes wrong, you will not be the only one involved. In fact, he had no interest in helping Di Beichin and the others solve the problem. He just wanted to show off in front of Bailey Hongzhuang. Chapter 35:11. As soon as he said this, the expressions of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three changed. Duan Huali's words were very impolite. It was obvious that he was targeting Di Beichin. However, Di Beichin smiled faintly and said casually, "Since I said that I can solve it, I can solve it. Senior brother Duan, you don't have to worry too much." Looking at Di Beichin's attitude, Duan Huali couldn't help but frown. He didn't expect this Di Beichin to be so arrogant to say such words to him. Junior brother Di, when Chu Jinfeng saw that the situation wasn't quite right, he hurriedly walked over and said, "Duan Huali, Junior brother D and the others were already very unhappy after being set up this time. Let them settle the grudges between them. Why do you need to worry about such a small matter? Once you take action, everything will be fine. After all, young people also need to experience their own experiences." Duan Huali, who was about to explode, was suddenly rebutted by Chu Jinfeng's words. However, Chu Jinfeng's words were very smooth, and it made his expression much better. Most of the foreign disciples are newborn calves who aren't afraid of tigers. This kind of arrogance will be smoothed out sooner or later. As soon as he finished speaking, Duan Huali was too lazy to say anything more to Di Beichun. He directly returned to his team and sat down to rest. This guy is too shameless. Shangguan Yingying sneered. Our arrogance? The one who is too arrogant is him, right? This kind of peacock-like guy likes to spread his tail, no matter who he sees. If you don't give him a chance to show off, he will naturally be very unhappy. Bailey Hongzhuang shrugged. Actually, you don't have to pay attention to it at all. Just treat it as a joke. As soon as Bailey Hongzhuang finished speaking, the expressions of Chu Jinfeng and the others changed. Ziren couldn't help but give a thumbs up. Hongzhuang, you really saw through Duan Huali's nature at a glance. Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows slightly. Of course. Let him do his own one-man show. When it's over, he will naturally leave. If I knew that my wife was so calm, I would have just ignored him. Di Beichun smiled and looked at Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. I see that you don't intend to take care of him. At least I managed to say a few more words to him and wasted a few seconds. Then you don't need to say a word. I'll listen to my wife. On the side, Chu Jinfeng watched Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichun echo each other and couldn't help but be dumbfounded. Previously, he was worried that some kind of conflict would break out. It turned out that Di Beichun and the others completely treated Duan Huali as a joke. If Duan Huali knew what Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were thinking, he would probably die of anger. I have to hand it to you guys, but I also agree, haha. Chu Jinfeng laughed. In the future, you guys better stay away from Duan Huali. This guy is not a good person. Don't be fooled by his usual sanctimonious appearance. He has done a lot of shady things behind the scenes, especially when he is interested in women. You guys have to be careful. Thinking of this, Chu Jinfeng still reminded Bailey Hongzhuang and the others. Thank you for the reminder. We'll be careful. A faint, complicated light flashed across Di Beichun's deep, dark eyes as he responded. Chapter 35:12. After receiving Chu Jinfeng's warning, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three felt a little complicated. Based on their interactions with Chu Jinfeng during this period of time, they had some understanding of his character. Since he could deliberately warn them, it proved that Duan Huali was indeed not someone to be trifled with. At the very least, Duan Huali's position in the inner hall was definitely higher than Chu Jinfeng's. Otherwise, Chu Jinfeng would not have taken him into consideration. Duan Huali returned to his team, still feeling a little unhappy. It was not easy to find a woman that he was interested in, but he did not expect that there would be a blind fellow who kept on causing trouble. He did not even have a chance to express himself. This feeling made him very unhappy. One had to know that with his status in the inner hall, very few people dare to speak to him like this. What? You've taken a fancy to that woman? After noticing Duan Huali's unhappy expression, Peng Kairui walked up to him and asked with a smile. Hearing Peng Kairui's words, Duan Huali raised his eyebrows. Don't you think that this woman looks very different? Compared to the goods in the inner hall, she's much better. Speaking of this, Duan Huali's eyes flashed with an evil light. He had basically seen all the outstanding women in the inner hall. Those that he had taken a fancy to would naturally not escape his grasp. During this period of time, he was worried that he would be bored. He did not expect that such a good thing would come to the outer hall. Naturally, he would not want to miss this opportunity. Looking at the intense excitement that flashed across Duan Huali's face, Peng Kairui already knew what he was thinking. He had been with Duan Huali for so long, so he could not be more familiar with the former's style. This woman's appearance is indeed outstanding. Moreover, her temperament is not something that ordinary people can compare to. Compared to your previous ones, she is indeed the most outstanding one. Not to mention you, I'm afraid that no one can ignore her. Hearing this, Duan Huali glanced at Peng Kairui indifferently and said, You have an idea too? His cold voice revealed some coldness and displeasure, but also contained some warning. Peng Kairui quickly waved his hand and said, I don't mean that. I just think that the woman beside him is very good. Hearing this, Duan Huali glanced at Shangguan Yingying, who was beside Bailey Hongzhuang, and a smile appeared in his eyes. It seems that we have the same idea. Peng Krue revealed a meaningful smile. Isn't this good? Recently, I've been staying in this training ground and facing these skeletons. It's really boring. It's just that I can relax when I go back this time. Duan Huali and Peng Krue looked at each other. Both of them smiled faintly, knowing what was going on. Huali, Peng Ying's hiss. Peng Krue looked at Duan Huali curiously. Logically speaking, with your position in the inner hall, this shouldn't happen. Duan Huali shrugged. These are just outer hall disciples who accidentally came to the wrong place. That's why they're here. It's normal that they don't know about my influence in the inner hall. When they return to the outer hall, they just need to ask around for my name, and they'll know how wrong their attitude is. Chapter 35:13. Looking at Duan Huali's confident look, Peng Krue nodded and said, "That's right. When I know your name, maybe you don't need to do anything and she will come to you directly." Haha. Duan Huali laughed heartily. That's not necessarily the case. According to my judgment, this woman is probably a proud and arrogant person. After all, with such an outstanding appearance, there must be a lot of suitors. I'm afraid it won't be so easy to get her. Oh, Peng Krue raised his eyebrows. Don't you have enough confidence in yourself? Duan Huali raised a finger and shook it, saying, "Of course I have enough confidence in myself. She will definitely become my woman. It's just that the process will be more troublesome than before. Speaking of which, I like such challenging things. If it's so easy to get, I always feel that it's a little lacking in charm." Hearing this, Peng Krue smiled. You really are a master of love. Haha, this kind of thing is not complicated. When they need our help, all these problems will naturally be solved. Duan Huali raised his eyebrows and smiled with some pride. What do you mean? Peng Krue looked at Duan Huali with slight confusion. He didn't understand what Duan Huali meant. It's very simple. Duan Huali smiled proudly. If they don't have any trouble, then we will create some trouble for them. As long as they can't solve it, it's naturally time for us to show up. However, they have just arrived at Penglai Palace and have already been framed. From this situation, I'm afraid that we don't need to create much trouble. They have already fallen into the vortex. Peng Krue gave Duan Huali a thumbs up. It's really a good method. It seems that you have already thought everything through. This woman is destined to be yours. Of course. Duan Huali nodded without any modesty. His face was full of confidence. Over the years, which woman that I've taken a fancy to has been able to escape from my grasp? Peng Krue thought carefully for a moment and then nodded in agreement. That's true. Among the outstanding figures in the inner palace, Duan Huali is the number one. Haha, that's not a bad name. Master, look at that smug look on Duan Huali's face. Just by looking at him, I can tell that he's up to no good. There's a wretched look on his face. Xiaohei looked at Duan Huali in the distance, her eyes filled with disgust. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang faintly glanced at Duan Huali. Indeed, she discovered that Duan Huali's face revealed a hint of a conspiracy. She frowned slightly. Let him be. Whether they were on Penglai Island or after joining Penglai Palace, these troubles were inevitable. They had already encountered a lot of trouble on Penglai Island. After coming to Penglai Palace, they did not find a safe haven. Instead, they had entered a bigger stage of competition. Therefore, she had long been prepared to fight. No matter what kind of trouble they would encounter next, she would deal with it calmly. Di Beichun and the other two did not say much. They had already seen that Duan Huali was not a good person. They only hoped that Duan Huali would not trouble them. Otherwise, they could only teach Duan Huali a lesson. Chapter 35:14. Night slowly fell. When the night once again shrouded the earth, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others in the cave couldn't help but show vigilant looks. Last night's incident had really left them with lingering fear. If there was another wave today, it would really be a big problem. When Duan Huali and the others saw Bailey Hongzhuang and the others, almost everyone showed the same vigilant look, and a strange light appeared in their eyes. All along, although Rin Ziheng and the others had emphasized to them that a big battle had happened last night, none of them took it to heart. They only thought that they were deliberately exaggerating to show off their achievements. However, the emotions that Rin Ziheng and the others were showing now really didn't seem to be faked, which made them a little curious. Duan Huali, do you think that what they said before was true? Otherwise, why would they be so vigilant? It doesn't seem normal. Peng Kairui frowned and said. Although he didn't usually have much contact with Ren Ziheng and the others, he had a certain understanding of Ren Ziheng. This reaction didn't seem to be groundless. Hearing this, Duan Huali pondered for a moment before shaking his head with a chuckle. Aren't you being a little too gullible? Forget about the both of us. Even others wouldn't believe such a thing if I were to tell them. You're right. Peng Kairui nodded thoughtfully. It's just that their reaction is really a little strange. If they don't act like this, how can they scare us? Duan Huali shrugged indifferently. Recently, Ren Ziheng's achievements haven't been very good. Maybe they want to use this method to emphasize their achievements. After all, people always want to save face. When these words came out, Peng Kairui couldn't help but laugh. That's true. Recently, he has often been assigned the task of protecting injured disciples. This is really it's good that you know. Duan Huali chuckled. Although Duan Huali and Peng Kairui's conversation wasn't loud, in such a quiet environment, it was still inevitable that it was heard by others. When Rinzime heard the discussion between the two of them, she couldn't help but feel angry. This was a slap to their faces. Duan Huali and Peng Kairui have gone too far. How could they speak to such an extent? Rinzime's face was filled with indignation. She was already disgusted with Duan Huali. This guy had some feelings for her before, but after being rejected by her, she was even ridiculed by this guy several times, which made her feel even more hateful. Ren Ziheng's expression was similarly ugly. There was a faint trace of anger in the depths of his eyes, but he did not show it on his face. He only patted Ren Zime's shoulder and said, "Forget it. It's not like you don't know what kind of person he is. If we really get angry with him, the ones who will be in trouble will be us. He can say whatever he wants. In any case, I'm doing the right thing, so there's no need to worry. I just don't like this guy. He always thinks he's so great, but in fact, just looking at his face makes me want to vomit." Renzime's face was still full of displeasure. If it weren't for Duan Huali's strength, she would have already fallen out with Duan Huali, but now she had to pretend to be very good on the surface. Chapter 35:15. It's best to let them not believe it. Anyway, when we return to the inner hall, we will definitely report this matter. At that time, the mentors will also confirm whether what we said is true or not. The more they don't believe it, the more they will lose face when the mentors confirm the result. Chu Jinfeng's eyes flashed with a sinister light. He was also full of disgust for Duan Huali. After all, he had always had feelings for Ren Zime, and Duan Huali's previous humiliation of Ren Zime was also something he couldn't stand. If it weren't for the fact that there was a certain gap between his strength and Duan Huali's, he would have already taught this self-righteous guy a lesson. Listening to Chu Jinfeng's words, Ren Zime's face looked better. She nodded and said, "You are right. Let this guy be self-righteous. When the time comes, he will be the one who will be slapped in the face." Yes, why should we care about what he thinks? A smile appeared on Ren Ziheng's face again. I actually hope that they will witness all this with their own eyes. When that time comes, their faces will definitely be very interesting. That night, Ren Ziheng's people had very complicated feelings. On one hand, they hoped that they could pass the night peacefully and return to Penglai Palace tomorrow. On the other hand, they wanted to see Duan Huali's shocked expression, so they hoped that the skeleton army would appear again. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three maintained the appearance of cultivation. After last night's incident, they understood that no matter what, they had to maintain their best state at all times. Once the skeleton army appeared, they would be able to deal with it in their best state. I hope that these skeletons will not appear again tonight. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for us to deal with another wave. Shangguan Yingying's face was full of prayer. Last night's experience was undoubtedly a nightmare. If they had not cooperated quite well, it was very likely that they would have been completely wiped out. She also understood why the number of inner hall disciples had always been maintained at a certain level. It was really too dangerous here. If they didn't have a certain level of strength, they would only lose their lives. Although there are more people in the team today, but in my opinion, with the arrogance of Duan Huali and the others, If a skeleton army really appears, I'm afraid it won't be easy to cooperate with them. Maybe it will be more of a hindrance. When Zyron sighed and shook his head. Sometimes, people with strength may not be able to help much because they tend to think highly of themselves and are unwilling to listen to the opinions of others. In his opinion, Duan Huali was clearly such a person. Zyron, your eye for people has become more and more accurate recently. Di Beichan gave Zyron a thumbs up. His handsome face curled up into an evil and playful smile. Beichan, are you praising me or insulting me? Zyron raised his eyebrows. Why did he feel that Di Beichan's words didn't sound right? Di Beichan gave a low laugh. I'm praising you for your progress. Time passed by minute. Everyone was waiting quietly. No one knew what would happen in the next second. Bailey Hongzhuang also warned the surroundings. As long as there was a slight movement, she would definitely notice it at the first moment. Chapter 35:16. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Di Beichan nodded and said, Indeed, it's still calm at the moment. There are no signs of the skeleton army appearing. It would be best if the skeleton army doesn't appear tonight. We can return to the outer hall tomorrow. Bailey Hongzhuang's lips curled into a relaxed smile. Li Shangkai had tricked them to come here in order to make them lose their lives. If they returned alive, Li Shangkai and the others would be very surprised. After returning to the outer hall tomorrow, the first thing I'll do is to find Li Shangkai. I treated him as a friend, but I didn't expect him to trick us like this behind our backs. If it weren't for our good luck, we would have died here yesterday. Shangguan Yingying's eyes flickered with anger. This time, they had been tricked too miserably. Just thinking about last night's experience made her feel a lingering fear. If they had been just a little bit slower, they would have been left here forever. Looking at Shangguan Yingying's fiery appearance, Zyron said, Okay, as long as we go back tomorrow, I'll accompany you to find Li Shangkai. I hope that guy is in the outer hall. The last time they came here to train, Li Shangkai and the others were obviously going to the training ground. They were not sure if Li Shangkai had returned after such a long time. If that guy is not in the outer hall, then I'll wait for him to appear. Unless he dies in the training ground, this matter will never end. Shangguan Yingying clenched her fists. She now felt that Li Shangkai was the most hateful person. If he had been an enemy from the beginning, it would have been fine. But he had deceived them as a friend, which was the most unbearable thing. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichan had no objections to this. This matter had to be resolved sooner or later. From the moment Li Shangkai chose to deceive them, they had already stood on the opposite side. The other party wanted to kill them, so how could they be polite? As time passed, Ren Ziheng and the others maintained a tense state. No one knew what would happen in the next moment. Compared to the nervousness of Ren Ziheng's group, Duan Huali's group appeared much calmer. Instead, they looked at Ren Ziheng's group as if they were looking at a joke. They didn't believe that so many skeletons would appear. The cave was very quiet. Everyone was looking around. If there was even the slightest movement, they would be the first to notice it. However, even as the sky gradually brightened, the wind and waves were still calm, and there were no fluctuations. Seeing the sky brighten, everyone couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Looks like we're in luck tonight. The skeletons won't appear again. Ren Ziheng heaved a sigh of relief. He really didn't want to experience what happened last night again. It would have been fine if they were fully prepared. However, their current situation was simply too difficult to deal with. A relaxed smile appeared on Ren Zimei's face. We're finally able to return safely. This time it was a close call. As she spoke, Ren Zimei looked at Bailey Hongzhuang's group of four. Fortunately, the four of you came here by accident. Otherwise, I'm afraid we wouldn't have been able to survive last night. As soon as she said this, Ren Ziheng and the others also looked at Bailey Hongzhuang's group of four. They also felt lucky. Chapter 35:17. Senior Sister Ren, you're praising us too much. We were just lucky. The corners of Bailey Hongzhuang's lips slowly curled into a faint smile. Her elegant and refined features looked even more otherworldly and elegant. Although they had stumbled into this place by accident, it was still a great harvest for them. Ren Zimei waved her hand and smiled. I'm telling the truth. Seeing how everyone was praising Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three, Duan Huali and Peng Krue could not help but look at each other. A look of disdain flashed across their eyes. Ren Zimei, aren't you exaggerating a little too much? Peng Krue slowly said, they're just 4 new disciples from the outer palace. Don't tell me that they could have turned the tide in the disaster that you're talking about. The moment these words were spoken, the cultivators behind Duan Huali all laughed out loud. Until now, they still felt as if they were watching a show. Ren Zimei and the others' praise for Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 had far exceeded their expectations. No matter how they looked at it, it was impossible. Hearing Peng Kurue's mocking words, Ren Zimei could not help but speak up. They did turn the tide in yesterday's matter. If it weren't for them, we would have been completely annihilated. Hee. Peng Kairue chuckled. The space between his brows was filled with disbelief. They're just disciples from the outer palace. How capable could they be? Ren Zimei, I think that you and your brother have been busy helping the injured recently. That's why your fighting strength and eyesight have deteriorated. Peng Kairue clicked his tongue and shook his head. His disdain could not be more obvious. A look of annoyance surfaced on Ren Zimei's face. It's your business if you don't believe me. Why do you have to slander my brother and me? What you're saying is wrong. How can this be considered as slander? I'm just telling the truth. Peng Kairue chuckled and ignored Ren Zimei's anger. Looking at Peng Kairue's arrogant appearance, Ren Zimei was even more furious. Her and Ren Ziheng's recent development in the inner hall was indeed inferior to Duan Huali and Peng Kairue, but no one could tolerate being ridiculed by them for no reason. Peng Kairue, I know you've been riding the crest of success recently, but everyone has their downfall. I advise you not to be too arrogant now. After all, it's better to leave a way out for others in the future. At this moment, Ren Ziheng spoke slowly, and his words were filled with warning. He didn't want to clash with Duan Huali and the others because he wanted to avoid some conflicts. However, if the other party really provoked him, he didn't lack the courage to fight back. Seeing that even Ren Ziheng was angered, Peng Krue restrained himself slightly and said, I was just joking. Aren't you 2 siblings going too far? Umph. Ren Zimei snorted coldly. The coldness on her face was still obvious. She insinuated, some people think too highly of themselves. They think they're the best and look down on the achievements of others. One day, they'll realize that they're the frogs at the bottom of the well. As soon as these words were spoken, Peng Kairue's face turned ugly. There was a faint trace of anger. Just as he was about to explode, Duan Huali suddenly reached out and stopped him. Chapter 35:18. Duan Huali's face was brimming with a smile that was like a spring breeze, showing his grace and magnanimity. However, whether it was Ren Ziheng and the others, or Bailey Hongzhuang and the others, none of them felt that Duan Huali's words were from the bottom of his heart. After all, Peng Kairue and Duan Huali's relationship was extremely good. The 2 of them were obviously the same. They were all the same. So how could Duan Huali and Peng Kairue have completely different thoughts? After hearing what you said, I'm also very interested in the 4 outer hall disciples. If there's a chance, I'll definitely see how powerful they are. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others' gazes fell on Duan Huali. It was clearly a very ordinary sentence, but to them, the meaning behind it was somewhat unusual. After Duan Huali finished speaking, he looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with a deep meaning. He didn't know why Ren Zimei would praise Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3, but he believed that Ren Zimei must have her reasons. Since he had already taken a fancy to Bailey Hongzhuang would be his woman in the future. If he had some skills, it would undoubtedly be best. Feeling Duan Huali's gaze, Bailey Hongzhuang had a somewhat ominous premonition in her heart. This Duan Huali was probably really troublesome. Duan Huali, aren't you too good-natured? You believe everything they say. Peng Kairue sighed and shook his head. A trace of a playful smile appeared on his face. In my opinion, the 4 deep pits that they spoke of are simply impossible. Wasn't everything fine last night? Peng Kairue's gaze swept over Ren Ziheng and the others. You must have seen that we haven't seen each other for a long time, So you deliberately made up a story for us to hear, right? That's not necessarily true. I know Rin Zixing and the others' character. I presume they wouldn't fabricate such a ridiculous story to deceive us. Duan Huali chuckled. Although Duan Huali's words sounded like he was standing on Run Ziheng's side, one could hear the sarcasm in his words if one listened carefully. The crowd was not stupid. Just by looking at Duan Huali and Peng Karue's expressions, they understood that they were singing the same tune and deliberately ridiculing them. Hearing the sarcasm in Duan Huali's tone, Run Ziheng did not try to defend himself. Recently, I have a new hobby, which is to make up stories. I especially like to make up stories that no one believes. He knew very well that Duan Huali wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to ridicule him. Rather than that, he might as well frankly say that he was making up a story, which would save him some trouble. Seeing that Rin Ziheng had given up and admitted that he was making up a story, Duan Huali was a little surprised. However, he quickly reacted and a smile appeared on his face again. He said, "Your story is indeed very well made up. If I wasn't careful, I would have thought that you were telling the truth. Thank you for the compliment," Rin Ziheng said indifferently. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at the surging waves between Rin Ziheng and Duan Huali and understood that the two of them were not on good terms. Moreover, it seemed that they had been on bad terms for a long time. However, the conflict in the inner hall did not have much to do with them for the time being. Naturally, there was no need for them to say anything. In my opinion, with Duan Huali's character, I'm afraid that he has many enemies in the inner hall. Xiren said slowly. Chapter 35:19. As long as he doesn't provoke us, we'll just pretend that we didn't see anything. Di Beichen looked indifferent, but he suddenly smiled and said, "But according to my judgment, this guy probably doesn't have good eyesight, so I'm afraid we'll have some trouble in the future." As soon as these words came out, Bailey Hongzhuang's face also showed a tacit smile. "I heard that his influence in the inner hall is not small. I'm afraid it'll be a challenge for us. Wouldn't life be boring if there were no challenges?" Di Beichen glanced at Bailey Hongzhuang and then said, "My wife and I should both like challenges, right? Husband sings, wife follows." Bailey Hongzhuang's lips curled up, her eyes shining brightly. Seeing that Di Beichen and Bailey Hongzhuang had already reached this tacit understanding, when Xiren also gave a thumbs up and sighed. "This show of affection, I give full marks." Shangwan Yingying chuckled. In the past, she rarely encountered difficulties and troubles. However, ever since she came to Penglai Island with Wen Xiren and the others, she discovered that there were troubles and difficulties. She had never left them. Now she had long been used to it. If there were no troubles coming to her from time to time, she was afraid that she would feel a little bored. As the sky gradually brightened, everyone's mood improved. Staying in this place of experience, everyone was always a little nervous. A little carelessness could cause them to lose their lives, so they were always in a state of depression. After returning to Penglai Palace, everyone could relax. At least they didn't have to worry about the possibility of losing their lives at any time. The sky is already bright. Let's go to the transmission array. A relaxed smile appeared on Run Zimei's face. Although the appearance of Duan Huali and others affected her mood, at this moment, she was still very happy. Chu Jinfeng nodded. "Okay, after we go back, we can also have a good rest. After I choose a place, I'll treat you to a meal." Listening to Chu Jinfeng's words, Run Zimei glanced at him. Originally, she didn't like this guy, but since the appearance of Duan Huali and Peng Karue, these two annoying guys, she felt that Chu Jinfeng was much more pleasing to the eye. "Okay," Ren Zimei responded faintly. The smile in Chu Jinfeng's eyes widened a little. According to the result of his discussion with Xiren before, if he could perform well this time, the possibility of winning the beauty's heart. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others, one after another, they all walked in the direction of the transmission array. Duan Huali also knew that his relationship with Ren Ziheng wasn't harmonious, so the two of them maintained a certain distance when traveling together. However, in the process of walking, Bailey Hongzhuang found that Duan Huali had been walking not far from her, and his eyes fell on her from time to time, full of a bit of flirting. Duan Huali had been watching Bailey Hongzhuang. Today, when he took a closer look, he only felt that Bailey Hongzhuang's appearance was more outstanding, and her temperament could be said to be extraordinary. At a glance, he knew that she was not an ordinary woman, and she was much better than the women he had pursued before. For a time, he actually felt a little serious in his heart. Chapter 35:20. Noticing Duan Huali's invasive gaze, Di Beichun directly put his hand on Bailey Hongzhuang's shoulder. At the same time, he glanced indifferently at Duan Huali, his eyes full of warning. Di Beichun's woman was not to be touched by anyone else. Even though Duan Huali's strength was not bad and he had a certain status in the inner hall, to him, this was not a deterrent at all. Anyone who had any ideas about Di Beichun's woman would definitely not have a good ending. Seeing Di Beichun's sudden action, Duan Huali could not help but be stunned. His eyes were full of astonishment. Although he already felt that Di Beichun was the backbone of Bailey Hongzhuang's team of four, he did not know that Di Beichun and Bailey Hongzhuang had such a relationship. It was really beyond his expectations. Taking a closer look, he found that Bailey Hongzhuang was also obediently leaning on Di Beichun. The two of them looked like a perfect match. He could not help but frown. This gave him a very unpleasant feeling. Peng Kairui also noticed this scene. He was secretly surprised. He did not expect that the woman Duan Huali had his eyes on this time was already taken. Duan Huali, it seems that your situation is not very good this time, Peng Kairui slowly said. Hearing this, Duan Huali's face turned cold. He said, so what? As long as it is a woman that I, Duan Huali, like, she will be mine sooner or later. Seeing that Duan Huali was still so determined after knowing the situation, Peng Kairui's eyes could not help but change a little. He then smiled and said, perhaps this kind of woman is more charming. He actually dared to provoke me. I will definitely let him know the price of provoking me. Duan Huali's face was gloomy. As a man, how could he not see the warning in Di Beichun's eyes? Di Beichun was obviously just an ordinary outer hall disciple, but he dared to provoke him. Was this not completely disregarding his dignity? If he did not teach him a lesson, how could he show his status? Duan Huali secretly thought in his heart. After returning, he must teach Di Beichun a lesson so that he would know that Penglai Palace was not like the outside. He could do whatever he wanted just because he had some strength. After all, outer hall disciples were just a bunch of trash in front of inner hall disciples. However, while Duan Huali was very angry, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were completely unaware. This was because they were already thinking about how they would settle the score with Li Shengkai when they returned. Ever since Bailey Hongzhuang and the others entered the training grounds of the inner hall disciples, Li Shengkai had been worried about this matter. Although the rest of the team firmly believed that Bailey Hongzhuang and the others would not be able to return alive, Li Shengkai was still on tenterhooks. After all, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three's performance in the outer hall was simply too frightening. Moreover, they must have their reasons for being so highly regarded by Lord Long. If they were lucky and did not fall in the training grounds of the inner hall disciples this time, he would be in trouble if they return alive. Just thinking about this possibility made him unable to eat or sleep in peace. Previously, there was no conflict between him and Bailey Hongzhuang and the others. On the contrary, they could even be considered friends. However, after this incident, he had completely offended them. Chapter 35:21. Li Shengkai, what are you thinking about? Why do you look so pale? Cheng Juanhe couldn't help but ask when he noticed Li Shengkai's complicated expression. Li Shengkai turned around, looked at Cheng Juanhe, and said, I keep having the feeling that what we did last time wasn't right. Today is the day the teleportation formation for the inner hall disciples will be activated. If they come back alive, what should we do? As the time drew closer, the anxiety in his heart grew stronger. If Bailey Hongzhuang's group of four really returned alive, they would be in deep trouble. Cheng Juanhe couldn't help but frown when he heard Li Shengkai's words. A hint of disdain appeared in his eyes. He said, Li Shengkai, aren't you a little too cowardly? You're actually still worried about this even now. Have you ever seen an outer palace disciple return alive after entering an inner palace disciple's training ground? That's simply impossible. Instead of spending your energy worrying about this, why don't you think about how to raise your own cultivation and not drag down the team's results? Li Shunkai felt rather helpless when he heard the displeasure and impatience in Chung Juinha's words. In fact, he understood that Chung Juinha was telling the truth. However, for some reason, he couldn't help but feel worried. In his opinion, Bailey Hongzhuang's group of 4 weren't ordinary people. After all, what they did before wasn't something an ordinary person could do. Even so, what should we do if they return alive? Li Shunkai couldn't help but ask. He knew that he was indeed very useless. In the eyes of Chung Juinha and the others, he had become a coward. However, he really had an inexplicable premonition. It's impossible for them to return alive. Chung Juinha's voice was slightly cold. Ever since they tricked Bailey Hongzhuang's group into the Inner Palace Disciples training ground, Li Shunkai had always looked like his soul had left his body. When they were training, he made mistakes time and time again. If it weren't for their help, Li Shunkai would have lost his life long ago. He was already very dissatisfied with this. He did not expect that after returning to the outer hall, Li Shunkai would still be on tenterhooks about this matter. This made him feel even more disdainful. Such a teammate was too cowardly. After noticing the conversation between Li Shunkai and Chung Juinha, the other cultivators in the team could not help but speak up to advise them. Li Shunkai, aren't you worrying too much? If they can really come back alive, then they're really lucky. Don't worry, they won't come back. Even if they do come back, you won't be the only one facing this disaster. Why are you so worried? I see that you've been distracted recently because you're worried about this matter. Why don't you go back and have a good rest? You'll be completely relieved tomorrow. Smiles appeared on everyone's faces. In their opinion, Li Shunkai had really become a coward. Although the commotion caused by Bailey Hongzhuang's group of 4 in the outer hall was a little frightening, it was a little too cowardly to be under their shadow. Moreover, in their opinion, Bailey Hongzhuang's group of 4 had already become souls in the ground. Chapter 35:22. All along, he was the only one who was worried about this matter. Everyone in the team seemed to have believed that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 were dead. However, he could not make everyone understand the premonition in his heart, so he could only be regarded as a coward by everyone. In fact, if he could, he really did not want to be involved in the matter of deceiving Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3. However, things had already developed to this point. Although he regretted it a little, there was nothing he could do. Since you all don't believe it, perhaps I'm really overthinking it. Li Shunkai sighed. A strong sense of helplessness appeared on his face. He really hoped that this matter would be as everyone thought and that there would not be any twists and turns. Chung Juinha glanced at Li Shunkai coldly. His eyes were filled with a hint of warning. It's your own business to be worried, but if you dare to leak a word about this matter, you'll have to bear the consequences. Chung Juinha also had a certain amount of misgivings about the matter of setting up Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 behind their backs. No matter what, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 were people that Master Long valued. Master Long had previously ordered them not to take revenge for the previous matter. If Master Long found out about this matter, it would be extremely detrimental to their future development. However, as long as Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 died quietly and they kept their mouths shut, they believed that no one else would know about this news. As soon as these words came out, the other cultivators also looked at Li Shunkai nervously. They were confident enough, but they could not help but worry about Li Shunkai's panic. Sensing everyone's gaze, Li Shunkai quickly nodded and said, "Don't worry, I will definitely not leak this matter." Chung Juinha carefully observed Li Shunkai's expression before slowly retracting his gaze. If Li Shunkai was still the same as before, then he did not mind getting rid of him. At least, he could avoid more trouble. When Bailey Hongzhuang and the others returned through the teleportation formation, they sighed in their hearts when they saw the 2 familiar teleportation formations. When they left previously, who would have thought that they would experience such a scene after entering the teleportation formation? Fortunately, they returned safely in the end, which really made them heave a sigh of relief. "I'm finally back." A smile appeared on Shangwan Yingying's face. Standing there, the air seemed to be less stuffy, and she felt relaxed. The faces of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two also showed a smile. At least it was much safer here. Junior Brother D, we need to return to the inner hall to hand in the mission. We won't stay with you any longer. Ren Ziheng looked at Di Beichen and the other three and said slowly. Di Beichen nodded. All right, you guys can go ahead and do your work. Compared to the lax training of the Outer Palace disciples, every time the Inner Palace disciples headed to the training grounds, they would receive some missions and must complete the handover. The rules of the Inner Palace were much stricter than the Outer Palace disciples. After we're done with our business, we'll come and have a drink with you when we're free, Chu Jinfeng said with a smile. No problem. When Xiren laughed heartily, he lowered his voice and said to Chu Jinfeng, when you're done with your business, you must find me for a drink. Chapter 35:23. After Ren Ziheng and the others left, Duan Huali stopped in front of Bailey Hongzhuang. His handsome face was filled with a kind smile. Junior Sister Bailey, if you can't handle the matter, you can come to the inner hall to find me. Thank you for your kindness, but I don't think it's necessary. Bailey Hongzhuang said faintly. This Duan Huali was obviously up to no good. She did not intend to give him the slightest chance to get close to her. Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang still bluntly refused, Duan Huali raised his eyebrows and did not say anything more. The smile on his face was still there. Junior Sister Bailey, you don't have to be in a hurry to refuse. There will be a time when you need my help in the future. At this time, Di Beichen stepped forward and separated Bailey Hongzhuang and Duan Huali. He said, Senior Brother Duan, don't worry. I will naturally deal with my wife's matter. I don't need anyone else to intervene. His handsome face was filled with a faint confidence. Di Beichen, who was already outstanding, looked even more magnificent and dazzling at this moment. Standing in front of Duan Huali, his aura was even stronger than Duan Huali's. Seeing this scene, a hint of surprise appeared in the eyes of the surrounding people. It should be known that Duan Huali was also an influential figure in the inner hall. Whether it was his temperament or his aura, he was very outstanding. They did not expect that he would be suppressed by an outer hall disciple. It was really surprising. Duan Huali naturally also noticed this. He could not help but lose the smile on his face. He said coldly, Junior Brother D is too confident. There are many talents in this Penglai Palace. Even if you have some ability, you should not be so arrogant. If this problem can't be solved in the end, it will be a joke. Hearing this, Di Beichen smiled faintly. Senior Brother Duan, you're worrying too much. I know you're kind-hearted, but I didn't expect you to be so concerned about someone else's wife. This is a little unnecessary. Duan Huali had repeatedly fawned over Bailey Hongzhuang, and Di Beichen had long been dissatisfied. Now that Duan Huali had done such a thing, Di Beichen naturally wouldn't be polite anymore. Following Di Beichen's words, the atmosphere suddenly became awkward. There were quite a few cultivators near the teleportation array. When they heard Di Beichen's words, they looked at Duan Huali with a strange expression. I've long heard that Duan Huali of the Inner Hall is a womanizer. I didn't expect him to have designs on someone else's wife. Isn't it a bit too low? Bailey Hongzhuang's appearance is the most outstanding. It's not surprising that Duan Huali has such thoughts. However, it's a bit too much to flirt with Di Beichen's wife so blatantly in front of him. Now there's a good show to watch. These two people are tit for tat. I don't know how Duan Huali will solve it. More and more cultivators gathered around, and their eyes were fixed on Di Beichen and Duan Huali, two very outstanding men. In terms of appearance, Duan Huali naturally lost to Di Beichen. However, Duan Huali's status in Penglai Palace was higher than Di Beichen's, so everyone was not sure who the final winner would be. Xiren and Shangwan Yingying looked at each other, and a faint smile appeared in their eyes. Beichen is angry. Xiren and Di Beichen have been together for so many years, so he knew Di Beichen's character very well. Just by looking at the subtle expressions on Di Beichen's face, he could judge Di Beichen's real thoughts. Chapter 35:24. Junior D, what do you mean by that? Duan Huali's tone was cold, and his words were full of warning. He was indeed interested in Bailey Hongzhuang, but at the moment when Di Beichen said it so bluntly, his face was obviously not as good as his. Don't tell me you still don't understand what I mean. Why I said couldn't be any more obvious. A cold light appeared on D. Baichan's handsome face. He glanced at Duan Huali indifferently, and his eyes were vaguely filled with disgust. In the next second, he ignored Duan Huali, put his arm around Bailey Hongzhuang's shoulder, and walked directly in the direction of the outer hall. Bailey Hongzhuang didn't say anything either, and just left with D. Baichan. At a time like this, her man would naturally do whatever he wanted. Seeing this scene, Duan Huali stood in the same place, dumbfounded. He looked at the backs of the two people leaving, and his face was as gloomy as the bottom of a pot. Rin Ziheng and the others hadn't gone far when they discovered the conflict between D. Baichan and Duan Huali. At this moment, after seeing D. Baichan's domineering side, a trace of surprise and shock emerged in everyone's hearts. I didn't expect D. Baichan to be so domineering. He actually directly started a fight with Duan Huali. Chu Jinfeng sighed. Through his previous interaction with D. Baichan, he only felt that D. Baichan was a man who was like a spring breeze. Whether it was the way he spoke or the way he acted, he was very gentle. There was a big difference between his current domineering and awe-inspiring appearance. Duan Huali is really too much. D. Baichan has already revealed his identity, but he still harassed Bailey Hongzhuang time and time again. No matter who it was, I'm afraid they would be angry by now, Rin Zimei said. Rin Ziheng shook his head and said, that's not necessarily true. If an ordinary person knew Duan Huali's position in the inner hall, they probably wouldn't dare to speak up directly. However, D. Baichan clearly knew, and yet he still dared to do so. At least this proves that he's not an ordinary person. Junior D isn't the coward you think he is. This action is not out of my expectations at all, Jing Tianlang said. Chu Jinfeng sighed. However, things have already reached this point. It's not easy to end it, Run Zimei nodded. Don't be fooled by Duan Huali's usual generous appearance. In fact, he's a narrow-minded man. Now that D. Baichan has offended him so badly, he will definitely think of ways to teach D. Baichan a lesson. I'm afraid they won't have an easy time in the future. Since Junior D has done this, he must have thought of the consequences. Don't worry too much. Rin Ziheng said slowly, no matter what, this is still the Penglai Palace. Even if Duan Huali wants to do something, he can't do it too blatantly. I still have to find a chance to remind Junior D and the others. If they don't take precautions, once they're tricked, it's really, did you see that? Just now, Duan Huali's face had already turned into the color of pig liver. Just thinking about it makes me laugh. Xiaohei held her stomach and giggled. D. Baichan's words just now really vented her anger. Chapter 35-25. Bailey Hongzhuang turned to look at D. Baichan beside her. His handsome face exuded a charming charm, as always. His slightly pursed lips revealed a cold arc. Just by looking at D. Baichan's expression, she knew that D. Baichan was really angry. D. Baichan wouldn't care about ordinary things. However, as long as it was related to Bailey Hongzhuang, it was completely different. Perhaps other people would be thinking about how to solve the problem after offending Duan Huali. However, Bailey Hongzhuang only felt a sweet feeling in her heart. Even though she already knew how important she was in D. Baichan's heart, she still felt very sweet when she saw how much D. Baichan cared about her. As for Duan Huali, Bailey Hongzhuang had long forgotten about him. In the next moment, Bailey Hongzhuang directly held D. Baichan's hand. Their fingers interlocked, and a faint smile appeared on her pretty face. D. Baichan was originally in a bad mood. However, after Bailey Hongzhuang's small action, the cold arc on his lips relaxed slightly and faintly rose. Duan Huali's face was already extremely ugly. The surrounding people's discussions and strange gazes made him feel even more embarrassed. Thinking about how he, Duan Huali, was famous in the inner hall, there were very few people who dared to embarrass him like this. He only felt an indescribable anger rising from his bones. He couldn't wait to tear D. Baichan into pieces. Pan Karuei looked at Duan Huali, standing in the same place. He couldn't help but walk to his side and say, "It's getting late. Let's go back." It didn't feel good to continue to stay here and be looked at by everyone. Although the target of everyone's attention was Duan Huali, Peng Kairue, as his teammate, was also very embarrassed. As Peng Kairue's voice fell, Duan Huali recovered from his anger. He looked at the surrounding people who were looking at him. The anger on his face couldn't help but become more vigorous. "What are you looking at? Get out of here!" Hearing Duan Huali's furious roar, the surrounding cultivators were all stunned. Immediately, they didn't dare to listen and scattered in all directions. With Duan Huali's position in the inner hall, they didn't dare to easily offend him. After all, with the former's means, it was undoubtedly easy to deal with them. However, Duan Huali's angry expression made them even more sure that what Di Baichen said before was true. Otherwise, Duan Huali wouldn't have been so angry. After the surrounding cultivators left one after another, Duan Huali then turned to look at Peng Kairue and the others. Peng Kairue and the others also restrained their expressions. They didn't want to anger Duan Huali at this time. "Let's go," Duan Huali said coldly. He needed to go back and think a way to deal with Di Baichen. Seeing this, everyone heaved a sigh of relief and immediately followed Duan Huali to the inner hall. They had stayed in the training ground for such a long time and were already very tired. Now, they really wanted to go back and have a good rest to recover their energy. After Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three returned to the outer hall, many cultivators' eyes fell on them. Speaking of which, although they had just arrived in the outer hall, they were indeed influential figures in the outer hall. Chapter 35:26. "Look, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three are back. Recently, I haven't seen any traces of them, nor have they appeared in the training grounds. I was wondering where they had gone. I'm not sure. The four of them are always alone in the outer hall. Who knows what they've been up to?" Numerous gazes fell on Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. However, everyone could still see that they were travel-worn and somewhat disheveled. It was obvious that they had experienced something before. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three looked around the outer hall for a while, then immediately walked straight to Li Shunkai's residence. Speaking of which, it was all thanks to Li Shunkai telling them where he lived. Otherwise, they would have to put in a lot of effort to find Li Shunkai. I wonder if Li Shunkai has returned yet. Shangguan Yingying's eyes were filled with a thoughtful light. If he hasn't returned yet, we'll just wait here in the outer hall. We must wait for him to return. Seeing Shangguan Yingying's look of wanting to tear Li Shunkai into pieces, a smile appeared on the faces of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two. "Don't worry. As long as Li Shunkai is still alive, we'll definitely get our revenge," Bailey Hongzhuang said with a faint smile. Li Shunkai's actions were indeed overboard, but after experiencing the training grounds in the inner hall, she felt that this was a very good harvest. At least, Li Shunkai's scheme did not succeed. When Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three arrived at Li Shunkai's residence, they happened to see Li Shunkai and some others standing in front of the building. After listening carefully, they realized that Li Shunkai and the others were talking about the four of them. "I'm really sorry. I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint you," Di Baichen's voice slowly sounded. As Di Baichen's voice fell, Li Shunkai, Cheng Juanhe, and the others who were talking could not help but be stunned. Just as they were wondering where the voice came from, they saw Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three menacingly approaching. Li Shunkai and the others could not help but be stunned when they saw them. They stared blankly at Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three, and a look of disbelief quickly climbed onto their faces. Why are you here?" Li Shunkai could not help but ask. "Why can't we be here?" Xiren's lips curled into a playful smile as he asked. Li Shunkai's face turned pale. What he was most worried about had happened. Cheng Juanhe and the others froze in place, looking at Bailey Hongzhuang and the others standing in front of them in disbelief. The word impossible kept appearing in their minds. "Impossible? How did you come back alive?" Cheng Juanhe's face was filled with disbelief. According to his judgment, as long as an outer hall disciple entered the training grounds of inner hall disciples, there was only a path to death. For so many years, there had never been such an accident. He had seen Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three enter the teleportation formation of the inner hall with his own eyes. How could they appear here alive? This was something that was simply impossible to happen. Chung Juinha could not figure it out no matter how hard he thought about it. This possibility had never appeared in his mind before. Hearing Chung Juinha's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three's gazes fell on him. Chapter 35:27. Is it that hard to believe that we came back alive? The corners of Shangwan Yingying's lips curled into a cold smile as she looked at Chung Juinha. If they didn't know much about Chung Juinha before, then looking at Chung Juinha's reaction now, they knew that Chung Juinha was definitely a member of this conspiracy. In fact, it was very likely that he was the initiator of this conspiracy. After all, Chung Juinha was the first to answer their question about the teleportation portal. This proved that Chung Juinha was the first to plot against them. Master, do we know this Chung Juinha? Why would he plot against us behind our backs? Xiaohei's eyes flashed with confusion. For what he could remember, they did not have any interactions with Chung Juinha. He should not have any reason to plot against them like this. Bailey Hongzhuang frowned. She also did not have any impression of Chung Juinha. She was not sure why he would do this. Come to think of it, he is very likely one of the cultivators who went against us back then. Perhaps his cultivation level has decreased a lot, so he secretly hates us. If that's the case, this matter can be explained. Di Beichen slowly said into Bailey Hongzhuang's ear. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang looked up and met Di Beichen's deep and wise eyes. She thought about it secretly and realized that Di Beichen's words made a lot of sense. There were too many cultivators who went against them back then. Even though many of them had fallen, there were still many left. She had some impression of many cultivators, but it was impossible for her to remember all of them. Therefore, it was normal for her to overlook some things. If Chung Juinha was one of the cultivators, then the enmity between the two of them would not be ordinary. Why do we care so much about him? Shangwan Yingying was very calm. Anyway, we just need to know that he is our enemy. As for why he did this, it doesn't matter to us. As Shangwan Yingying's voice fell, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two nodded in unison. This was the truth. In any case, the enmity between them had already reached an irreconcilable level. It seemed that only when the other party paid a sufficient price would it be completely resolved. Chung Juinha and the others glanced at each other, and they seemed as if they'd seen a ghost. According to their knowledge, there was no example of an outer palace disciple coming back alive after entering the training grounds of the inner palace disciples. What should we do now? Li Shunkai couldn't help but look at Chung Juinha. Ever since Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three fought in the outer hall, he knew how powerful they were. He knew that his strength could not be compared to Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. As long as the four of them wanted to kill him, he would not be able to resist. Most importantly, he didn't want to die at all. Now, he regretted it to the extreme. If he had known that Bailey Hongzhuang and the others would be able to return alive, he would not have joined Chung Juinha and the others in this conspiracy. Now, he was completely dragged into the water. When he thought about the terrifying combat power of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three, he knew that even if everyone here joined forces, they would still not be a match for them. At the thought of this, Li Shunkai felt as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. Cold sweat began to form on his back. Chapter 35:28. It was not just Li Shunkai and Chung Juinha. The other cultivators in the group were also pale. They could not understand how Bailey Hongzhuang's group of four could come back alive after entering such a dangerous place. Even though they were filled with regret, there was no medicine for regret at this moment. Everyone felt a chill run down their spines, and their minds were in a mess. They did not know how to react. Bailey Hongzhuang's group of four is too strange. Previously, so many people went against them, but they didn't die. This time, they actually came out alive from the training ground of the Inner Palace disciples. I really don't know how they did it. A cultivator could not help but sigh. His words were filled with disbelief. He only felt that all the common sense that they originally understood had become illogical after encountering Bailey Hongzhuang's group of four. It was clearly something that could not be broken, but it became an accident when they encountered them. I don't know. These four people are just too strange. I'm afraid we're one step behind. If we knew this would happen, we wouldn't have targeted them before. Now we're in big trouble, everyone whispered. Their hearts were filled with annoyance and regret. At this moment, they were even more afraid. Li Shunkai, no matter what, we've known each other before. I didn't expect you to give us such a big gift. We'll have to return it to you properly. Xiren looked at Li Shunkai with a faint smile. Although the smile on his face was as gentle as a spring breeze, anyone could hear the cold, murderous intent in his words. Li Shunkai's expression was extremely ugly. He really did not want to fight Bailey Hongzhuang's group of four head-on because he had no confidence in his own strength. He believed that any cultivator who had seen Bailey Hongzhuang's group of four in action would not have the confidence to fight them head-on because the four of them were completely abnormal. If Bailey Hongzhuang poisoned him, he would really want to cry, but no tears would come out. Junior Brother 1, this matter? There might be a misunderstanding. Li Shunkai stammered. Misunderstanding? Xiren chuckled. I'd like to know what kind of misunderstanding it is. You wouldn't be trying to tell us that you've been in the Outer Palace for such a long time, yet you've even forgotten which teleportation formation to head to the training grounds of the Outer Palace disciples, right? Shangwan Ying looked at Li Shunkai mockingly. She felt that what Li Shunkai said was a complete joke. He clearly remembered that when they came to report, Li Shunkai had clearly told them that he had been in the Outer Hall for a very long time, so he knew the matters of the Outer Hall very well. If he told them this now, no one would believe him. Li Shunkai was a little embarrassed. He only felt that his mind was blank. He wanted to cover up this matter, but he found that he couldn't find a reason to lie at all. In fact, if this was said, no one would believe it, let alone Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. For a moment, Li Shunkai and the others fell silent. They were constantly thinking about what to do. Sheng Juna's gaze fell on Bailey Hongzhuang's group of four. He hated the four of them to the bone. If it were not for them, his cultivation would not have dropped so much. Chapter 35-29. The appearance of Bailey Hongzhuang's group of four had already attracted a lot of attention. Now that they had a conflict with Li Shunkai's group, it naturally became the matter that everyone was most concerned about. What's going on? Why are Bailey Hongzhuang's group of four fighting with Li Shunkai's group again? The four of them are really stirring up trouble one after another. From what I heard from their conversation, it seems that Li Shunkai's group tricked Bailey Hongzhuang's group of four into going to the training grounds of the Inner Palace disciples. Now, Bailey Hongzhuang's group of four has come looking for them. No way. We've all heard about how dangerous the training grounds of the Inner Palace disciples are. It's said that as long as an Outer Palace disciple goes there, they won't be able to come back alive. How did Bailey Hongzhuang's group of four do it? In that case, Li Shunkai's group is really ruthless. They want to kill Bailey Hongzhuang's group. If I came back alive, I would definitely come looking for trouble with them. It's normal. Didn't you see Cheng Juanhe in the group? In my opinion, this is most likely Cheng Juanhe's idea. His cultivation was originally close to the 8th level of the Purple Realm. Now, because of Bailey Hongzhuang's poison, he has fallen to the 6th level of the Purple Realm. It's said that there's not much hope for him to enter the Inner Palace, so it's not strange for him to do this. Bailey Hongzhuang's group, who didn't know much about the specific situation, understood the whole story after hearing the crowd's discussion. It turned out that Cheng Juanhe's cultivation had regressed so much because of them. Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows and looked at Di Beichun, saying, "It seems that your analysis is completely correct." Di Beichun smiled faintly. Of course. Junior Brother 1, it's indeed my fault in this matter. I apologize to you. Li Shunkai braced himself and said. He understood that it was humiliating to say such words, but it was nothing compared to losing his life. As soon as these words were spoken, when Xiren couldn't help but chuckle and say, "You almost took our lives, yet you're trying to brush this matter aside with a casual apology? Isn't it a little too easy?" The awkwardness on Li Shunkai's face deepened. Looking at Xiren's aggressive eyes, he didn't know how to respond. In fact, he knew very well that no matter what he said at this time, it would be useless. "I didn't think that you would be able to come back alive. It seems that your luck is really good." Cheng Juanhe looked coldly at Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. He knew very well that there was no turning back. Since that was the case, he might as well admit it openly and honestly. Cowering would only be more embarrassing. Good luck? Baichin smirked. If everyone knew what they had gone through, they wouldn't think that they were just lucky. Isn't that the case? Chung Juinha sneered. The heavens are really blind. They should have just let you die in the training ground of the Inner Hall disciples. As soon as Chung Juinha finished speaking, the faces of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three turned cold. A strong, murderous aura exploded from their bodies. Only ghosts knew what they had gone through, and it was all thanks to Chung Juinha. Chapter 35:30. Shangguan Yingying found Chung Juinha's anger very funny. Ever since they joined the Penglai Palace, they had always been in a defensive position and had never taken the initiative to attack others. However, everyone had never intended to let them go and had constantly coveted their things, resulting in such a result. However, Chung Juinha was now pushing all the blame onto them. It was simply too laughable. Everyone knew that Shangguan Yingying was right, but Chung Juinha did not take this matter to heart. In his opinion, the reason why his cultivation had become what it was today was all thanks to Bailey Hongzhuang. Therefore, this hatred must be blamed on Bailey Hongzhuang. What do you want now? Chung Juinha's gaze fell on Bailey Hongzhuang and Baichin. His eyes flashed with a cold chill and a faint murderous intent, but more than that, there was still fear. Don't you know what we want? Baichin asked back. Hearing this, Chung Juinha looked at Baichin in surprise and doubt. Many thoughts flashed through his mind in an instant. He still did not believe that Baichin and the other three would dare to take their lives here. I did plot against you behind your backs, but if you make a big deal out of this now, it will not end well for you or for us. Chung Juinha looked at the expressions of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. This could be considered a personal grudge between them. Last time, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others caused too much of a sensation in the outer hall. Although they were not punished later, they must have been warned by Master Long. If the four of them had just returned and caused a big conflict, it would be difficult for them to explain to Master Long. Therefore, he could only put his hope on this point. As long as they had some considerations, then there was still a chance for things to turn around. At least, as long as they did not take action now, he still had hope to find others to help. It was much better than only them dealing with it. Are you threatening us? Bailey Hongzhuang's cold gaze landed on Chung Juinha's face. Her slightly raised lips revealed a hint of mockery and amusement, but more importantly, a hint of mockery. Chung Juinha was slightly stunned by Bailey Hongzhuang's straightforwardness. Yes, his words did contain some threat, but now that Bailey Hongzhuang said it out loud, he felt that his threat seemed to have lessened. You should know that although the outer hall does not prevent conflicts between cultivators, what you did last time has already angered everyone. If you continue to do this now, it will not be beneficial to your future development in the Penglai Palace. Chung Juinha continued. At this point, he could only use this method to make Bailey Hongzhuang and the others change their minds because he was not confident that he could defeat them. If that's the case, then I have to thank you for reminding us of this. Bailey Hongzhuang's lips curled up slightly, and the mockery in her eyes became more intense. What I said is the truth. If you don't believe me, you can ask the others. Chung Juinha forced himself to say. However, in the next moment, Baichin had already kicked Chung Juinha. Bang! Chapter 35:31. Do we look like people who are afraid of trouble? Baichin looked at Chung Juinha coldly. Today, we're here to take your lives. Baichin's sudden kick stunned everyone present. No one expected him to make such a clean move without any scruples at all. Chung Juinha stared blankly at Baichin, who was looking down at him from above. He couldn't come back to his senses for a while. His analysis was obviously not wrong at all. Logically speaking, any cultivator would hesitate in such a situation. However, Baichin was so decisive, which really exceeded his expectations. Baichin, you! Chung Juinha shouted angrily as he quickly got up from the ground. Being kicked to the ground by the other party really made him lose face. You what? Ziren looked at Chung Juinha coldly. You damn guys, just wait to die. From a moment they decided to take revenge, they had already made up their minds. As long as they were still alive, Chung Juinha and the others would definitely die. As Xiren's voice fell, the atmosphere at the scene suddenly changed. The temperature quickly dropped, and Li Shangkai and the others felt as if they had fallen into an ice cellar. In the next moment, without waiting for Li Shangkai and the others to speak, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three started to move without hesitation. After a whole night's rest yesterday, they had all recovered to their peak condition. Although Li Shangkai's team had a total of 8 people, they were no threat to them. Moreover, after experiencing being surrounded by the skeleton army, the advantage in numbers was no longer important to them. Vigorous Yuanqi burst out from the bodies of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3. They had already chosen their respective targets and immediately attacked each other agilely. Li Shangkai and the others were stunned. They didn't expect Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 to immediately take action. They didn't care about Cheng Juana's previous persuasion at all. However, they were also cultivators with rich combat power. When they saw Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 take action, they also went up to meet them. The battle broke out at this moment. Bang, bang, bang. The vigorous elemental energy mixed with the strong and ferocious strength constantly collided. The energy that spread out in all directions even shot out small holes that were almost 10 centimeters long on the ground. 12 people were entangled. Even if Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 only had 4 people, they still didn't fall into a disadvantageous position in a 1 versus 2 situation. At the sight of this, the surrounding cultivators who were watching the fight suddenly had interesting expressions on their faces. Such a good show suddenly happened. For them, it was a liveliness that they couldn't miss. The strength of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 to 4. They have just joined the Penglai Palace, but they are able to fight against 2. You know that Cheng Juanha and the others have been in the Penglai Palace for 3 to 4 years. They have been cultivators who have been in the Penglai Palace for 3 to 4 years. Their strength is indeed terrifying. Judging from this strength, I'm afraid they will definitely be members of the Inner Hall in the future. Fortunately, their contract beasts have just been contracted. If the strength of the contract beasts increases, then their combat power will be even more terrifying.